It's late. I'm glad you're here. I'm Tim. If you're new, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. This is where we sit up together, when the night is long and sleep is slow to come. The kettle's on. There's a chair for you. Whatever you were carrying today, you can set it down at the door. 3 stories tonight. The first is about a man who buys a house at foreclosure auction and finds that somebody is still in it. The second is about a hospice nurse in a small Pennsylvania county who has been noticing something in the corners of certain rooms. The third is about a smoke jumper on a mop up in the Alaskan interior, and a figure on the ridge half a mile ahead of him. Dark stories. Real ones. You don't have to keep up. You don't have to remember any of it in the morning. If your eyes get heavy in the middle of one, that's the whole point. I'll keep talking. You'll drift. The stories will keep going. A like helps another tired person find their way here on some long night. A subscribe brings me back to you on the next one. So, settle in. Pull the blanket up. Let the day fall away. Take a slow breath in. And a slower one out. When you're ready, we'll begin. Dennis Fall bought his first house at foreclosure auction in the spring of 2019. He was 31. He had $11,000 in a manila envelope inside his jacket and $7,000 more in a savings account he had built over 4 years of selling insurance in a strip mall office in Buffalo. He sat in a folding chair in the basement of the Erie County Courthouse and waited for the auctioneer to work through the morning list. The house was on Nadolny Street in Lackawanna, near the old plant. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, 780 square feet. Tax value, $42,000. Minimum bid $12,000. The previous owner had died in the front bedroom 9 months earlier, and no family had come forward. Dennis had driven past it on the Sunday before the auction. He had stood on the curb for 15 minutes and looked at the peeling clapboard and the sagging porch and the yellow strip of tape stapled across the front door. He had done the math in his head. 16 to buy. 9 to fix. Rent for $850 a month. His first door. The bidding took 11 minutes. He got it for $14,500. He signed the papers at the clerk's desk with a big pen the clerk handed him. He drove home with the deed in the envelope on the passenger seat. He sat at his kitchen table that night and looked at the auction photograph and felt, for the first time in his adult life, the specific electric feeling of ownership. Not renting, not owing, owning a thing that was his, because he had put his money on it and won. He fixed it up in 11 weeks. Most of the work he did himself, evenings and weekends. He hired a roofer for the shingles and a plumber for the drain stack and did everything else with his own hands. He rented it on the 22nd of June, 2019, to a young couple for $840 a month. They stayed 19 months. When they moved out to buy their own place, Dennis raised the rent by $50 and had it filled again in 6 days. By 2024, he owned 11 houses. He had quit the insurance job. He drove a used Ford F-150 with a bed full of tools and a clipboard on the dash. He had an office over a laundromat on Ridge Road with his name on the door in vinyl letters. A wife of 2 years named Denise. A daughter of 9 months named Ellery, and gross rental income of about $11,000 a month. He was 36. He was doing well. He bought house number 12 on the 14th of March, 2025. It was on Aldrich Place, in the far north end of Lackawanna, near the freight yards. 2-story frame, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, unfinished basement. Tax value $58,000. Minimum bid $18,000. He got it for $21,200. Denise did not know he had gone over 20. He had told her the ceiling was 18. He signed the papers. He drove home with the deed on the passenger seat. That was where it started. He went out to look at the house the next morning at 10. He parked at the curb and sat in the truck for a minute. It was worse than the auction photograph had suggested. The siding had gone the color of old butter. The front porch was intact, but the railing was gone. The ground floor windows were boarded. A single dead maple stood in the front yard. The lot ran 120 feet back to the alley, and at the back of the property he could see the corner of a shed. He got out and walked the perimeter with his clipboard. The clipboard had a checklist he had developed over 11 houses. Foundation, drainage, roof line, service entrance, gas meter, chimney, siding, windows, doors. He worked through it. Foundation fair. Drainage bad. The grade sloped toward the house on the west side, which meant seepage in the basement. He wrote it down. Roof line had a sag on the east side, which meant the ridge was going, which meant a full tear-off and resheathing. He wrote it down. $7,000 instead of the $3,000 he had budgeted. Siding was aluminum, which meant it was worth about $90 a ton at scrap, but was going to have to be replaced. Windows on the second floor were double-hung wood from the 50s, painted shut, glazing gone. Windows on the first floor were boarded, so he could not see the frames. Chimney had a crack running from the flashing down to the roof line. He wrote it all down. He was up to $11,000 in repairs by the time he reached the east side of the house, and he had not yet been inside. He came around the back corner of the house and stopped. The shed was open. Not the door. The whole east wall was gone. Framing intact. Roof intact. The other 3 walls intact. But the wall that had faced the back of the house had been taken off the studs and was not in the yard. Dennis stood at the corner of the house. The cuts were fresh. That was the thing that stopped him. He walked closer and looked at the exposed ends of the studs. Weathered wood cut clean, the exposed grain pail where the saw had gone through. He put his thumb on one of the cut ends. The wood dust came off on his skin. Fresh sawdust. Somebody had done this in the last few weeks, not 14 months ago when Vernon Waltrip had died. Recently, he walked around the shed. Inside was empty concrete, 10 by 12. A bare bulb hung on a wire from the ceiling. A pull chain hung from the bulb. Nothing else. No shelves, no tools, no boxes, no stored anything. He looked at the ground between the house and the shed. There was a rectangular impression in the dirt, 12 feet by 4, where something heavy had been sitting recently. The dirt inside the rectangle was compacted deeper than the dirt around it. Something with weight had been here. A trailer. Whoever had taken the wall had put it on the trailer and driven it away. He squatted and put his hand flat on the compacted dirt. Warmed by the sun. He picked up a piece of the dirt and broke it between his fingers. Dry, whatever had been sitting here at least 3 days. He stood up. He walked back to the truck and got the keys and went to the back door. Standard steel entry door of the sort that had been installed in Lackawanna houses in the 80s. Deadbolt in the middle. He put the key in and turned it. The lock turned smoothly, oiled recently, which was the third thing that stopped him. A deadbolt in a foreclosure that had been sitting 14 months should have been dry and rough. He pushed the door open. The kitchen was gone. Not empty. Not stripped. Gone. The room the door opened into was the size and shape of the kitchen on the plans. But there were no cabinets, no appliances, no plumbing fixtures. The walls were bare plaster. The floor was bare plywood subfloor. The ceiling was bare joists. Above the joists, Dennis could see the underside of the second floor subfloor. He stood in the doorway with his hand still on the deadbolt. The gas line was capped clean at the floor where the stove had been, sealed with a plumber's compound that was still dark and pliable. The sink connections were capped in the wall cavity, the copper stubs neat, the caps soldered on tight. The electrical box for the range was covered with a proper metal plate. Whoever had taken this room out had done it right. Nothing was leaking. Nothing was live. Not smashed. Not vandalized. Removed, part by part, and taken away. He walked in. His boots sounded loud on the plywood. The subfloor was clean. Somebody had swept it. There were no nails in it. There were no staples. The plywood was in good condition. The original plywood laid when the house was built in the 70s. It had been under whatever floor covering had been in the kitchen. Vinyl, probably, or linoleum. And now it was exposed and clean. He walked to the wall where the sink had been. He put his hand on the plaster. Cool and dry. He tapped it with his knuckle. Solid, he walked to the wall where the stove had been. Same, he tapped the whole wall in a line at chest height, moving down the room. Solid everywhere. No hollow spots. No cavities. No places where a doorway or a chase had been closed up and skimmed over. The wall was old plaster on old lath. It had been there since 1971 when the house had been built. Nothing had been added to it. Nothing had been taken away except what had been mounted to it. He walked to the next doorway. It opened into a room that was intact. Living room. 12 by 15. Hardwood floors that had been walked on for 50 years. The grain worn dark, and a path from the front hall doorway across to the bay window on the front. Then over to the fireplace on the west wall. Plaster walls with the small dents of long habitation. A light fixture in the middle of the ceiling. A brass thing with 3 amber glass shades. The Dennis dated to about 1968. Wallpaper along the top of the walls, 4 inches wide. A border of small dark flowers running under the crown molding. The border was faded at the top and clean along the bottom, which meant it had been up for at least 20 years. Below the border, the walls were painted a cream color, not a fresh coat. The paint had been there long enough that in 3 places Dennis could see faint rectangular outlines where pictures had been hung. Not damage, just the shadow of pictures that had been in those spots for so long that the paint around them had darkened by degrees over time, and the paint under them had not. He counted the rectangles. 3 on the west wall, 2 on the east wall, 1 over the mantel. 6 pictures. A family, wife and husband and a boy. Old graduation photos and school portraits, most likely. The kind of pictures a Lackawanna family had put on the wall of a Lackawanna living room in the 80s. The pictures were gone, but the shadows were still there. Dennis walked to the doorway to the dining room. He looked through it. The dining room was gone. Same as the kitchen. Bare plaster, bare subfloor, bare joists. He went back into the living room and looked at the two doorways he had just come through. From the living room side, they looked normal. Trim on the frames, painted the same cream as the wall. The wallpaper border running unbroken across the top of the opening, as if there was a wall behind it, and a real room behind that wall. He put his finger on the trim of the kitchen doorway. The wood was old, salvaged, aged to match. He looked at the joins where the trim met the door frame. Perfect. Whoever had done this had made the openings look, from the living room side, like they went to intact rooms. He looked at the wallpaper border. It ran across the top of the kitchen doorway and continued along the east wall. The seam where the border pieces met over the doorway was tight. He could not see it without leaning in. He leaned in. He found the seam. It was hairline. The paper had been cut to match the pattern and glued down with a bookbinder's precision. Somebody had spent an afternoon just on that seam. He walked to the front hall. He looked at the stairs. The stairs were oak treads with pine risers, painted white. The paint on the risers was chipped in the middle of each riser, where feet had kicked them for 50 years. The treads had the dark wear of use in the middle third of each step. The banister was oak, worn smooth on the top, where hands had gripped it, going up and coming down for half a century. He climbed them slowly, testing each tread with his weight before committing. They held. The fourth from the top creaked. Everything else was silent. At the top was a landing. 3 doorways. Master bedroom on the front, second bedroom on the back, bathroom between them. He opened the master bedroom. Intact, wall-to-wall carpet gone brown with age. A closet with the door open. Empty inside, except for one wire hanger on the rod. A window facing the front yard. A light fixture on the ceiling. The room had the specific stillness of a room that had been vacant for a long time. Dust on the carpet in an even layer. Nobody had walked through it recently. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room. There were 2 impressions in the carpet along the west wall. Rectangular, deep, a bed had been there. And beside where the head of the bed had been, a smaller impression. Square, deeper, a nightstand. On the wall above where the head of the bed had been, a picture rectangle. The paint outside the rectangle was a darker cream than the paint inside it. The same effect he had seen in the living room. One picture. Above the bed. He walked in. He knelt down and looked at the picture rectangle from close. The paint difference was slight. Not something you would see if you were painting over it for a rental. Something a man would see who had lived under it for 40 years and had taken it down himself recently and had left the shadow. He stood up. He backed out of the room. He closed the door. He opened the second bedroom. Gone bare plaster, bare subfloor, bare joists. He opened the bathroom. Intact, old fixtures, pink tile from the 60s. A pedestal sink with the porcelain crazed and yellow. A cast iron tub with clawed feet, the enamel chipped in 3 places along the front edge. a window over the tub with pebbled glass, a small mirror over the sink. He looked at himself in the mirror. His face was pale. He had not realized until he saw himself. His jaw was set in the specific way it set when he was making himself do something. His hands were on the pedestal of the sink, and his knuckles were white. He stepped back from the mirror. He stood on the landing. The house had a shape. The living room, the front hall, the stairs, the master bedroom, the bathroom. Those were intact. The kitchen, the dining room, the second bedroom, those were gone. Somebody had prepared the house to look, from the intact rooms, like a house. From the living room, both doorways looked like they went to real rooms. From the landing, all three doorways looked like they went to real rooms. Only if you opened the doors and stepped in did you see that half the house was not there. Somebody had done this on purpose. Somebody had spent weeks of professional work, reframing openings, aging trim to match, cutting wallpaper borders on a hairline seam so a real estate agent doing a walkthrough would not notice that the wall behind the doorway was a real wall for a house that was going to sell at auction for $21,000. Dennis stood on the landing for a long time. Then he walked down the stairs. He walked out the front door. He locked it behind him and drove home. He did not call the county. He did not call the police. He did not call his lawyer. He had a suspicion, standing on that landing, that any call he made was going to end with the county opening an investigation and the property being tied up in probate for 2 years while they sorted it out. He would be out $1,200. He would have to explain to Denise why he had lost that much money on a house he had bought without telling her the actual bid. Denise did not know he had gone over 20. That was the fact he kept coming back to on the drive home. He sat in his truck in the driveway when he got there. The March afternoon light was low and thin. He looked at his own house, a small ranch on a corner lot in Cheektowaga that he and Denise had bought together in 2022 for $180,000 that they were paying off at $900 a month over 30 years. His own house was warm and normal and had all its rooms. The rooms that were gone in the house on Aldrich Place were gone. He could rebuild them. It would cost him more than he had budgeted. $15,000, maybe $20,000. That would eat his margin on the first year of rent. But it would not kill him. He owned 11 other houses. He could carry it. And there was. He told himself. Whoever had done the work in the house had done it professionally. The reframing was good. The finish work was good. Whoever had done it had known what he was doing. Which meant Dennis could do it too. He had been framing walls in Lackawanna houses for 6 years. He could put the rooms back. He went inside. He had dinner with Denise and Ellery. Ellery had started laughing that week, a real laugh, not the little coos she had been making, and Denise had gotten a video of it on her phone. She played it for him 3 times at the table. Dennis laughed each time. Denise leaned across the table and put her hand on his hand. He did not say anything about the house. He went back the next morning at 7. He unloaded the materials from the truck bed. 2x4s, drywall, screws, mud pan, joint compound. $287.40 on the receipt from Home Depot at 7:52 that morning. He set up his miter saw on the back porch. He measured the wall between the kitchen and the dining room from the plans and cut the plates to length. 16-inch centers, 12 studs. He cut them and stacked them beside the door. He carried the plates in first and toe-nailed the bottom plate to the subfloor. He set the top plate on the joists overhead and nailed it. He set the first stud in the corner and toe-nailed it in at the base and toe-nailed it in at the top. The framing gun made a clean, sharp sound in the empty room. He set the second stud. He set the third. By noon, he had the wall framed. He took his lunch on the front porch, a sandwich and a thermos of coffee he had made at home, and sat looking at the street. Nobody was out. The street was as quiet as it had been the day before. A pickup drove past at 12:20. A woman walked a dog past at 10:01. Neither of them looked at the house. He went back in at 1. He started on the drywall. He set the first sheet against the framing, marked the outlet cutout, scored the paper with his utility knife, snapped the sheet, and lifted it into place. He drove 3 screws to hold it, then went back and set the pattern, 16 inches apart on the studs, a screw every 12 inches. Then the second sheet. Then the third. Then the third sheet on the dining room side. 283 screws in total by 4 in the afternoon. He mixed the batch of joint compound and put a coat on the seams. He set the paper tape into the compound and drew his knife down it in one smooth pass. The tape was tight to the drywall. He put a second coat over the tape and feathered it out on both sides. He did the same on the dining room side. He worked steadily. At 5, he stepped back and looked at the wall. It was a good wall. Plumb, square, taped, first coat of mud drying. Ready to sand in the morning and put a second coat on by lunch and a third coat before he went home. He was cleaning up his tools at 5:20 when he heard the tapping. Not loud, a small sound, metal on wood. 2 taps, then a pause, then 2 more taps. Dennis stopped moving. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen he had just framed, with a rag in his hand, wiping joint compound off his knife. He listened. The sound came again. 2 taps, from outside, from behind the house. He set the knife on the top of a 2x4 stub and walked to the back door. His boots sounded loud on the plywood. He put his hand on the deadbolt. He turned it. He opened the door. The shed was still there. The east wall was still gone. The bare bulb still hung on its wire. The yard was empty. There was nobody in the shed. There was nobody in the yard. There was nobody in the alley. The tapping had stopped. The sun was low over the freight yards. The March light was thin and cold. His breath came out in a small cloud. The tapping came again. 2 taps. It was coming from inside the shed. Dennis walked down the porch steps. He crossed the yard. He stood at the open east side of the shed and looked in. The pull chain was moving, not swinging, not from wind, moving in a small, precise arc. Twice. A pull, a release, a pull, a release. Then it stopped. Then twice again. Dennis watched it. Nothing else moved. Empty concrete pad. Bare bulb overhead. The 3 intact walls. And the pull chain moving in that small, precise arc as if a hand he could not see was pulling it twice, then letting it go, then pulling it twice. The temperature dropped. He felt it on his face first. The air went from March cold to something colder. and it happened in 1 second, not gradually. His breath thickened in front of him. The metal of the pole chain in the light of the sun through the open side of the shed had a fine crust of frost forming on it. He was watching it form. Small crystals building on the metal in real time. The shed smelled suddenly like turned earth, wet and cold, like the inside of a grave that had been open for a day. He said out loud, at the ordinary volume of his own voice, "Who's here?" The pull chain stopped. Silence. The traffic on Ridge Road, half a mile east, had gone silent. The freight yards had gone silent. Somewhere behind him, a dog that had been barking off and on all afternoon was silent. Dennis could not hear anything except his own breathing. Then from the concrete pad, from a spot about 4 feet in from the open east side, came a small sound. Metal on concrete. A nail dropped, or something the size of a nail. Then a foot to the left. Another, and a foot to the left again. Small metal sounds moving in a straight line across the pad, from east to west, at a walking pace. The rhythm was even, not random. Somebody was walking across the pad, from the open side to the west wall, and was dropping a nail every foot. Dennis stood at the edge of the pad. His hands were cold. His hands were shaking. He gripped the wooden frame of the shed's open side to keep his hands still. The wood was cold under his palm. The cold went into his palm and up his wrist and into his forearm. The sounds crossed the pad. They reached the west wall. They stopped. Then they came back. Same rhythm, same walking pace. West to east. When they reached the open side, they stopped again. Dennis was breathing hard. He could see his own breath. His face was numb. The cold had gone through his jacket and was working on his ribs. The pole chain jerked once. Hard, almost violent, and stopped. He turned around and walked back to the house. He walked fast. He did not run. He went in through the back door and locked it. He walked past his wall, the wall he had just built, plumb and square, joint compound drying on the seams, and he gathered his tools and put them in the truck and drove home. He did not tell Denise. He came back the next morning at 7. He had spent the night talking himself out of it. The tapping had been a pipe expanding somewhere in the walls of the house, transmitted through the joists to the yard. The pull chain had been moving from an air current he had not felt. The cold had been the March wind picking up unexpectedly. The nails had been the metal snap ties in the concrete pad shifting, as the ground had warmed and cooled through the day. Old sheds did strange things. Old houses did strange things. He had been in the business 6 years, and he had heard every strange sound an old building could make. He unlocked the back door. The kitchen was empty. Not empty of his tools. Empty of his wall. The 2x4s he had cut and nailed the day before were not there. The drywall was not there. The screws were not there. The mud pan was not there. The joint compound was not there. The paper tape was not there. The framing was not there. The subfloor was clean. There were no marks on it. There were no screw holes on the plates, because the plates were not there. There was nothing on the joists where he had nailed the top plate. There was nothing between the kitchen and the dining room except open air. Dennis stood in the doorway with his hand still on the deadbolt. He walked in. He walked to where the wall had been. He put his hand on the plaster of the north wall. Solid, he tapped it with his knuckle. Solid, he tapped the plywood at his feet with the toe of his boot. Solid, he walked to the ceiling and looked up at the joists. He looked for holes from his top plate nails. There were no holes. The joists were as they had been before he touched them. His wall had not been removed. There was no evidence that a wall had ever been there. He walked back out to the truck. He got in the cab. He sat for a long time. His hands were on the steering wheel. He looked at his hands. The skin on his knuckles was chapped from the March air. Real. He was real. He had built a wall in this house yesterday. He was sure. He drove to Aldrich Place, not to the house, down the street. He parked at the corner and he sat and he watched the house. He watched it for 4 hours. Nobody went in. Nobody came out. No trucks. No trailers. No pedestrians on the street. Nothing. The March sun climbed up over the freight yards and warmed the truck cab, and Dennis sat and watched the empty house on Aldrich Place. And nothing moved in the yard or on the porch or through the boarded windows. At noon, he drove home. He told Denise he had a slow week and was going to take a couple of days off. He spent the Thursday at his office above the laundromat, drinking coffee and looking at the wall and trying to work through what was happening. He came to 3 explanations. The first was that he had not, in fact, framed the wall on the Wednesday, that he had come into the house, had planned to frame it, had thought about framing it, and had left without doing it. That his memory of framing it, of the 2x4s, and the drywall and the screws and the joint compound, was a false memory of a task he had planned to do, and had somehow, in the ordinary way of a tired man in the middle of a busy month, convinced himself he had completed. He held that for perhaps 11 minutes. He let it go, because he had, on the passenger side floor of his truck, the receipt from Home Depot from Wednesday morning at 7:52 for $287.40. He had bought the materials. He had driven them to the house. He had unloaded them. He had built the wall. The materials were also not in the kitchen anymore. Whatever had taken the wall had taken the materials. The second explanation was that somebody had come in on Wednesday night and undone the framing, pulled the drywall off the studs, pulled the studs off the plates, swept up the dust and the screws, taken all of it away. He held that idea. Somebody had, at some point, done exactly that to the whole kitchen and the whole dining room and the whole second bedroom of the house. Somebody was capable of it. But he had watched the house for 4 hours on the Thursday morning and had not seen anyone. To undo his wall clean in one night, without leaving a trace, would have taken a crew of 4, with the right tools and 8 hours of work. If they had done it on the Wednesday night, they had left before he got there in the morning, and they had done it quietly enough that no neighbor had called anyone. The third explanation was that the house was not letting him fix it. He sat with that for a long time. He was not a man who believed in ghosts. He was 36 years old. He had grown up in South Buffalo. He had gone to a Catholic school through 8th grade, but he had stopped believing in most of what the nuns had told him by the time he was 15. He was a landlord and a father and a husband, and he was not a man who was going to sit at a desk in an office over a laundromat on Ridge Road and seriously consider the possibility that a house on Aldrich Place was, in a small, quiet way, being kept by something. that had died in it. But he had heard the tapping. He had seen the pull chain. He had felt the cold. He had heard nails walked across a concrete pad. The third explanation was the only one that fit. He decided he was going to test it. He drove to Home Depot on the Friday morning. He bought the same materials again. He put them in the truck. He drove to Aldrich Place. He unlocked the back door. He carried the materials in. He framed the wall. It took him 7 hours. He did the framing and the sheathing and the mudding on the seams. He worked steadily. He did not stop for lunch. By 4 in the afternoon, he had a wall between the kitchen and the dining room, sheathed on both sides, mud drying on the joints. He stepped back and looked at it. Then he took his phone out. He took a photograph of the wall from the kitchen side. He took a photograph of the wall from the dining room side. He took a photograph of the doorway between the kitchen and the living room with his wall visible behind it. He took photographs from every angle. He took a video that walked from the back door across the kitchen and up to the wall and around it into the dining room. Time-stamped, geotagged, in the cloud within 4 seconds. He walked out to the truck. He drove home. He did not sleep well. He got up twice in the night to check the photographs on his phone. Each time they were still there. Time-stamped Friday at 4:10. Geotagged at 42,813 minus 78,833, which was the middle of the yard on Aldrich Place. The wall was in the photographs. He had built it. He had proof. On the Saturday morning at 7, he parked in front of the house on Aldrich Place. He sat in the truck for a moment. Then he got out and walked around to the back and unlocked the deadbolt. The kitchen was empty. His wall was gone. The materials were gone. The subfloor was clean. There were no marks on the plaster of the north wall. Dennis stood in the doorway. His phone was in his hand. He opened the photographs. They were still there. Time-stamped Friday at 4:10, showing the wall he had built in this room, which was now empty. He walked in. He walked to where the wall had been. He put his hand on the plaster of the north wall. Solid, he tapped the plywood at his feet with the toe of his boot. Solid, he walked out to the shed. The pull chain was moving, twice, then pause, then twice again. He stood at the open east side and watched. The temperature dropped again, the same immediate drop, the same second, and his breath thickened in front of him. Frost formed on the metal of the pull chain. The smell of turned earth came into the shed, wet and cold. He said, out loud, "What?" The pull chain stopped. He waited. Then, from the concrete pad, the metal sounds started. Not walking this time. Rapid, small metal on concrete in a pattern. 3 sounds, evenly spaced. Pause, 3 sounds. Pause, 3 sounds. Then a longer pause. Then 2 sounds. Pause, 2 sounds. Pause, 2 sounds. Then a longer pause. Then 1 sound. Pause, 1 sound. Pause, 1 sound. Then silence. Dennis stood at the edge of the pad in the quiet of a Saturday morning in the north end of Lackawanna and looked at the empty concrete. 3, 2, 1. He thought about it. 3 for the sheathing. 2 for the trim. 1 for the finish. That was the carpenter's count. You drove 3 16-penny nails at each stud when you were nailing off sheathing. You drove 2 8-penny nails at each connection when you were setting the trim. You drove 1 finish nail at each spot when you were setting the finished molding. A carpenter's boy learned that in the shop from his father. The chain jerked. Once, hard, and stopped. Dennis stood at the edge of the pad. He said, out loud, "Wade." The air did not answer, but somewhere at the west wall of the shed, a nail was set on the concrete. A small, careful sound of metal placed down. And then another, a foot away. And then another foot. 3 nails, spaced along the west wall of the shed, as if a boy had been going to nail up sheathing on that wall and had set his nails out ready. Then silence. The temperature came back up. The smell of turned earth faded. The frost on the pull chain began to melt and drop onto the concrete in small, dark spots. Dennis walked back to the house. He locked the back door. He got in his truck. He drove home. He did not tell Denise. He spent Saturday night at his kitchen table with his laptop open and a beer he was not drinking. He was searching the deed history of 1447 Aldrich Place. Erie County online records went back to 1974. He wrote the names down on a legal pad. 1974, Grant Marcus Bendel to Ernest and Mildred Waltrip. 1988, Ernest and Mildred Waltrip to Waltrip Family Trust. 2003, Waltrip Family Trust to Vernon Waltrip. 2024, Vernon Waltrip died. Property to probate. 2025, property sold at foreclosure auction on the 14th of March. Vernon Waltrip was the last owner. He had died in the front bedroom of the house in the summer of 2024. No family had come forward. Dennis pulled up the obituary in the Buffalo News. Vernon Waltrip, 78, died at his home in Lackawanna on the 21st of July, 2024. He was preceded in death by his wife, Rita Ann Waltrip, who had died in 1997. His brother, Merrick Waltrip, who had died in 2011. And his son, Wade Vernon Waltrip, who had died in 2003 at the age of 14. He was survived by nobody. He had been a carpenter with Local 66 of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners for 41 years, retiring in 2013. Services were to be private. In lieu of flowers, the family requested donations to the Local 66 Apprenticeship Fund. There was a photograph. Vernon at about 60 in a dark suit at some union function. A big man with square shoulders and a gray brush cut, holding a plaque of some kind, not smiling. The kind of face Dennis had grown up around in South Buffalo. A carpenter's face. A carpenter. Dennis sat with that. He looked at Vernon's face on the screen. He looked at his own hands on the keyboard. Then he scrolled further. He found a small article from the Lackawanna Bee News from June of 2003 about the death of Wade Waltrip. Wade had been 14. He had been killed in an accident in his father's workshop at the family home on Aldrich Place on the 2nd of June, 2003. The workshop had been in the shed at the back of the house. Wade had been working on a project of his own, a small pine chest that he was making as a gift for his mother's birthday, which was going to be on the 15th of June. He had been alone in the shed. A 2x4 had fallen from a shelf above the workbench and had struck him on the temple. He had died before Vernon had found him 20 minutes later at 6:10 on a Saturday evening. There was a small photograph, a school portrait of Wade. Dark hair, freckles across the nose, a slight smile, blue plaid shirt, about 14. He looked like a boy who had learned to smile for a camera and had not yet learned to be embarrassed about it. Dennis sat back from the laptop. He looked at the picture of Wade for a long time. He thought about his own daughter, Ellery, asleep in her crib upstairs, 9 months old. In 14 years, she would be Wade's age. In 14 years, he would be 50. In 14 years, if he was not careful, she could be a picture in a small newspaper article that somebody would find on a laptop at midnight in a kitchen in Cheektowaga, 22 years after the fact. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and kept reading. He found more. He found a photograph from the B News from a school event at Cardinal Doherty Middle School in 2002. Wade Waltrip and a group of 8th grade shop class students standing in front of a workbench with a birdhouse he had made. The article was about the shop class program. Wade was in the middle of the photograph. He was grinning. There was a scrape on his forearm. He found another photograph from a local 66 newsletter from a Take Your Kid to Work day in 2001 at a Buffalo Public Schools job site. Vernon Waltrip in a hard hat with his son in a smaller hard hat beside him. Wade was 12. Vernon's hand was on Wade's shoulder. They were both looking at the camera. Vernon was smiling in the small, controlled way of a man who did not usually smile. Wade was smiling with his whole face. Dennis closed the laptop. He went into the room where Ellery slept. She was in her crib. The nightlight was on. She was on her back with her arms over her head, the way she slept, breathing in the small, even breaths of a baby who was healthy. Denise was in the bed in the next room. He could hear her breathing, too, slow and steady. He stood at the crib and looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he went back to the kitchen and opened the laptop again. He got a piece of paper. He drew the floor plan of the house on Aldrich Place from memory. He drew a box around the intact rooms. Living room, front hall and stairs. Master bedroom. Bathroom, he drew a different box around the removed rooms. Kitchen, dining room. Second bedroom. He sat with the plan. Then he opened a new browser tab and searched for renovation records on the property. There was a permit from 1997 for a kitchen renovation filed by Vernon Waltrip. There was a permit from 1985 for a dining room conversion. The old dining room had been made into a den, filed by Ernest Waltrip. There was a permit from 2010 for the second bedroom, listed as guest room refinish, filed by Vernon Waltrip. 1997. That was the year Rita had died. 1985. That was before Wade had been born, before the family had been what it became. 2010. That was 7 years after Wade had died. 3 renovations. 3 of the same rooms that were gone. The kitchen had been renovated the year Vernon had lost his wife. He had put in new cabinets, new appliances, new flooring, new everything, because the old kitchen was the one Rita had cooked in. The dining room had been converted to a den the year before Rita and Vernon had gotten married. Before it had been a room the family had eaten in. The second bedroom had been refinished 7 years after Vernon had lost his son. Wade's room, which had been done as a guest room in 2010, because Vernon could not stand seeing it as Wade's room anymore. The rooms that had been changed after the family stopped being whole. Those were the rooms that were gone. Dennis sat at the kitchen table. Vernon Waltrip had spent the 14 months between his own death and the county auction going back through his own house and taking out every room that had been changed after his son had died. not to destroy the house, to put it back to the version of it that had held the family, to put it back to when Wade was alive. He had reframed the doorway so the removed rooms would not be seen from the intact rooms. He had aged the trim so it would match. He had cut wallpaper on hairline seams. He had done a carpenter's work. He had done it for 14 months. At night, alone, dead. And Dennis had bought it. And Dennis was undoing it, trying to put the house back into the shape he wanted it in, trying to make it a rental, trying to build walls between rooms that a father had spent the last of what he had rebuilding into the shape of a house that had held his son. The metal sounds on the concrete pad were not Vernon. They were Wade. Wade was still in the shed. He had been in the shed since 6:10 on the 2nd of June, 2003, at 14 years old, working on a pine chest for his mother's birthday, which was 13 days away. And his father had spent 21 years going into the shed after work and standing at the concrete pad and counting nails with a boy who had never gotten to finish his mother's chest. That was what Vernon had done in the 14 months after his own death. He had gone back to Wade in the shed. And he had come out at night with his tools. And he had gone through the rest of the house. And he had taken it back to the year when his family was still there. And he had left the shed open on the east side so he could see it from the house. Dennis closed the laptop. He got up from the kitchen table. He went to bed. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark next to Denise and listened to her breathing and thought about the shed and the boy in the shed and the man who had gone back to the boy. He thought about Ellery in the next room. He thought about his 11 other houses in Lackawanna and West Seneca and South Buffalo. In every one of them, when he had first walked in, the house had been the shape a stranger had left it in. Cabinets in the wrong places. Wallpaper the previous owner had chosen. Small marks on the wall where somebody's child had grown up and been measured with a pencil year by year. He had always painted over them. That was the business. You bought the house, and you painted over the marks, and you rented it to somebody else who was going to make new marks that you would paint over when they left. He had been painting over people for 6 years. He drove out to the house on the Sunday morning at 8. He did not bring materials. He did not bring tools. He drove out with an empty truck bed, and he parked at the curb, and he sat and looked at the house. He had come to a decision in the small hours of the Sunday morning. He was going to sell it. He would put it back on the market on Monday. He would price it at what he had paid for it, $21,200. He would take the first cash offer. He would eat the closing costs and the 2 trips to Home Depot and the 11 hours of his own work. He would tell Denise the truth about how much he had paid. He would take her judgment. He would not tell her about Vernon. He would not tell her about Wade. He got out of the truck. He walked around to the back. He unlocked the deadbolt. He opened the door. The kitchen was there. Not the bare room he had seen on the Saturday morning. Not the plywood subfloor and the bare plaster walls. A kitchen. Cabinets on the walls, the fronts painted white in a paint from the 80s. A sink under the window with a curtain above it, brown gingham. The pattern faded. A stove where the gas line came out of the floor. A Kenmore electric range with 4 coil burners. One burner missing its drip pan. The enamel on the front of the stove chipped in 2 places. A refrigerator by the doorway to the dining room, avocado green, the kind that had been sold in Lackawanna in about 1978 and had run in kitchens like this for 40 years. Linoleum on the floor in a pattern of brown and gold squares, worn thin in a path from the back door to the sink and from the sink to the refrigerator. Dennis stood in the doorway. The air was warm. The kitchen was warm the way a kitchen is warm at the end of a family breakfast. He could smell coffee. Not fresh coffee. The smell of coffee that had been sitting in a pot for a couple of hours after being poured. He walked in. He put his hand on the counter. It was warm. Not from the sun. He could feel the specific warmth of a countertop that had held plates and mugs and had been wiped down with a warm rag. The vinyl of the countertop was cracked in a small line along one edge, and a piece of it had been repaired with a strip of clear tape, badly, decades ago. He walked to the stove. There was a pot on the front burner. He put his hand on the side of the pot. Warm, he lifted the lid. Coffee, about half a pot of it. The oil of it had a rainbow sheen across the surface. The pot had been sitting for 2 hours. He walked to the refrigerator. He put his hand on the door. Cool. He opened it. There was a bottle of milk on the top shelf, the paper carton kind that used to come from the local dairy in Lackawanna. There was a plate of biscuits under a piece of wax paper. There was a jar of homemade preserves, plum, the wax seal still on it. On the door, there was a bottle of Coca-Cola in the small 10-ounce glass shape from the 80s. He closed the refrigerator. He walked to the doorway to the dining room. He stopped in the doorway and looked in. There was a dining room now. A wooden table for 6. A china cabinet against one wall with plates in it. Everyday plates, blue and white, stacked, a light fixture hanging low over the table. The shade of pale amber glass. Dark wallpaper with a pattern of small flowers. A rug on the floor with a brown stain near one corner. At the head of the table, a chair had been pushed back and turned slightly to the side as if somebody had just gotten up. There were 3 plates on the table. 2 of the plates had crumbs on them. One had a half-eaten biscuit. There was a small ceramic bowl in the middle of the table with plum preserves in it. There was a pat of butter on a dish, softened. Dennis stood in the doorway. He did not go in. He backed up. He walked out of the kitchen through the doorway to the living room. He walked through the front hall. He went up the stairs. He stopped at the top. He went to the second bedroom. The door was open now. It had been closed on the Wednesday. He had opened it and looked in and had seen the empty room and had closed it. Now it was open. A little. 6 inches. He walked to the door. He pushed it the rest of the way open. It was Wade's room, a twin bed made up with a comforter that had baseball players on it. Buffalo Bills and Sabres logos and a Bills helmet in the middle. A dresser against the west wall with a wooden model airplane on top, a B-17, painted in gray and green, with white American star insignia. A small desk with a lamp with a plaid shade. A poster on the north wall of a Bills team, 2001 season. Doug Flutie in the middle in his throwing motion. A pennant from Cardinal Doherty High School on the other wall. A shelf with books on it. Adventure novels. Jack London. Louis L'Amour. A set of Hardy Boys hardcovers. A pair of sneakers on the floor next to the closet. Brown leather high tops. The laces knotted. the tongues folded down the way boys fold them when they are in a hurry to take their shoes off. On the bed, on the pillow, was a small pine chest. It was maybe 10 inches by 6. It had 4 sides, a bottom, and a lid propped open at an angle. The sides had been dovetailed at the corners. Dennis had never made a dovetail joint in his life, but he had seen them in enough antique furniture to know what one looked like. These were good dovetails. Neat, tight, the pins and tails cut cleanly with a sharp saw. 3 of the 4 corners were dovetailed and glued. The 4th corner had been dovetailed, but not yet glued. The pieces sat together, but the joint was loose. A small brown bottle of hide glue sat on the desk beside the bed. A small brush was propped in the mouth of the bottle. Somebody had been about to glue the 4th corner. The lid was propped open. Inside the chest was a piece of cedar shavings and a small folded piece of paper. The paper had been folded 3 times. It was on top of the shavings, waiting to be included in the finished chest as a gift. Dennis stepped closer. He did not touch the paper. He leaned in and looked at it. The folded edge was at the top. Along the fold, in a boy's handwriting, in pencil, in a hand he could read from where he was standing. Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Wade Dennis stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the chest. He looked at the folded note. He looked at the sneakers by the closet. The room smelled like a boy's bedroom. The smell was faint. The smell of a boy who had come in from playing outside on a summer afternoon and had thrown his sneakers by the closet and had gone downstairs for a snack. Sweat and grass, and the specific smell of laundry that had been sitting in a hamper for a couple of days. Dennis backed out of the room. He put his hand on the doorknob and pulled the door closed behind him. He pulled it to 6 inches open, the way it had been. He did not close it all the way. He walked down the stairs. He walked through the front hall. He walked through the living room. He walked through the doorway to the kitchen. The kitchen was still there. The coffee smell was still there. The pot on the stove was still warm. In the dining room, the chair was still pushed back from the table. The half-eaten biscuit was still on the plate. He walked to the back door. He unlocked it. He went out. He locked it behind him. He got in his truck. He sat for a long time. The morning was cool. The March sun was climbing. In the yard behind the house, at the back of the property, the shed's open east side faced the porch. Inside the shed, the pull chain hung still. Nothing moved. He drove home. He sat in his driveway for a long time. Then he went inside. Denise was in the kitchen with Ellery, feeding her cereal at the high chair. She looked up when he came in. Her face changed a little. She had been married to him for 2 years. She had known him for 6. She could see something on him. "You're back early," she said. He said, "Yeah." She looked at him. "You all right, Dan?" he said. "I'm all right." He sat down at the kitchen table across from her. He looked at Ellery. Ellery had cereal on her chin. Denise wiped it off with a small cloth. Ellery laughed. Denise laughed. She looked at him and stopped laughing. He said, "The house on Aldrich. I'm not going to sell it. I'm just going to hold it." Denise said, "Hold it. You mean not rent it?" He said, "Not rent it. Not sell it. Just hold it." Denise said, "That's a lot of money to hold, Dan." He said, "I know." She looked at him. She looked at Ellery. She looked back at him. She said, "How much did you pay for it?" He said, 21.2. Denise said, You told me 18 was the ceiling. He said, I know. I went over. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. Ellery was banging her small hand on the tray of the high chair. Denise did not look at Ellery. She was looking at him. She said in a careful voice, Dan, is there something wrong with the house? He said, yeah. She said, something bad. He looked at her. He looked at Ellery. He looked at his own hands on the table. He said, no, not bad. He said, somebody's still in it. Denise looked at him for a long time. She said, somebody's living in it. He said, no, somebody who died in it. And the house is the way he wants it. And I'm not going to change it. I'm going to leave it. Denise looked at him for a long time. He watched her face. He saw her go through the sequence a woman goes through when her husband tells her something like that. First, the concern that he was not well. Then the concern that he was serious. Then the concern that he had been carrying this alone. Then the specific hard thing, which was that if he was serious, then the money was really going to be gone. $1,800 a month in mortgage and taxes and insurance. $21,000 they were not going to see back. She said, how long, Dan? He said, I don't know. Not forever. Maybe a year. Maybe 2. She said 2 years. He said, maybe. I don't know. She sat with that for a while. Ellery banged the tray again. Denise reached over without looking and pushed the Cheerio to Ellery's hand. Ellery picked it up and put it in her mouth. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the other houses are carrying their mortgages fine. He said, yeah. She said, we can carry $1,800 a month on the margin from the other 11. He said, for a year. 2 if we're careful. She said, and after 2. He said, I don't know. I don't know if it'll take 2. She looked at him. She said, Dan, are you sure? He said, yeah, I'm sure. She looked at him for a while more. She said, are you scared of it? He thought about that. He said, no. It's not scary. It's a family. It's a family that got small, and then got smaller, and then it got its house back, and I don't want to take it away from them. Denise looked at him for a very long time. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on his hand. Her hand was warm. It had a small piece of Cheerio on the palm. She did not brush it off. She said, all right, then. She said, 2 years. If it's more than 2 years, we talk again. He said, okay. She said, you'll tell me before you go over any ceiling from now on. Any ceiling. Even $100. He said, okay. She sat with her hand on his hand for a moment. Then she went back to feeding Ellery. Dennis got up. He put his hand on Ellery's small head as he passed her chair. He walked out to the front porch. He stood in the cool of the March evening in Cheektowaga and looked at the sky. It was clear. The sun was over the airport to the west. There were high clouds moving. He thought about a boy in a shed on a Saturday evening in June of 2003, alone, working on a small pine chest for his mother's birthday. A boy who had been 13 days out from the birthday and had done 3 of the 4 dovetail corners and had been working on the 4th. He thought about a 2x4 falling from a shelf. He thought about a father coming out to the shed at 6:10 and finding his son on the concrete pad, and about the 21 years the father had lived after that, and about the last 14 months of a house being taken back to the shape of a family. He was going to let them have it. For as long as they needed it. If Vernon needed 20 years, he would carry it 20 years. He would refinance if he had to. He would sell one of the other houses if he had to. He would have a difficult conversation with Denise every year if he had to. He would find a way. That was the business he was in. He was in the business of houses, and he had 11 other houses. And he could carry the 12th. He went back inside. At 1447 Aldrich Place, in the far north end of Lackawanna, at 6:10 on that Sunday evening in March of 2025, the pull chain in the shed moved twice, then paused, then moved twice again. In the kitchen with the avocado refrigerator and the brown gingham curtain, a pot of coffee sat on the stove going cold. Rita would clean it out later. She always did. In the dining room, a chair had been pushed back from the table and turned to the side. Vernon had gone up to check on Wade, who was working in the shed on a project for his mother. Vernon would come back down in a few minutes and sit at his place at the table and finish his biscuit, which he had left with the preserves half scraped onto it. Upstairs, in the second bedroom, on the pillow of a twin bed, with a comforter that had the Buffalo Bills on it, a small pine chest sat with 3 corners finished, and the 4th in the middle of being glued. The hide glue bottle sat on the desk with the brush propped in it. The chest was 10 inches by 6. Inside was a piece of cedar shaving and a folded piece of paper. The paper said, in a boy's handwriting, in pencil along the fold, "Happy birthday, Mom." Love, Wade the chest, was not finished. It was going to be finished. That was the thing. It was in the middle of being finished. It had been in the middle of being finished for 22 years, since 6:10 on the 2nd of June, 2003, when Wade Waltrip had been 14, and his mother's birthday had been 13 days away, and he had been in the shed, alone, gluing the 3rd corner, with the 4th waiting on the workbench. His father had gone out to check on him. His mother had been in the kitchen. The house had been theirs. The house was theirs. Dennis Fall, 36, of Cheektowaga, New York, would carry the mortgage for as long as they needed. His wife would help him. His 11 other houses would pay for it. His daughter Ellery, who was 9 months old, would grow up not knowing about the house at 1447 Aldrich Place. It would sit on the books of his LLC and be paid for, and be quiet. And at 1447 Aldrich Place, on the 2nd Saturday of every June, at 6:10 in the evening, a boy in a shed would be gluing the 4th corner of a small pine chest. He would get it right this time. He would come inside for supper. His mother would set the chest on the sideboard in the dining room. His father would come home from the site and would wash his hands at the kitchen sink. They would sit down at the table for supper. 3 plates. A pot of coffee on the stove. The evening light coming in through the window over the sink. That was the house. Dennis went inside his own house in Cheektowaga at 6:10 on the evening of Sunday, the 16th of March, 2025. He held his daughter Ellery in his lap while Denise made dinner. Ellery pulled at his shirt collar with her small hand. He was 36. He had 12 houses. He was doing well. Alma Reed had been a hospice nurse in Clarion County, Pennsylvania, for 23 years, and she could tell the shape of a death from the moment she walked into a sick room. Not the day, not the hour, the shape, the way a death carried itself. Whether it was going to come slow with the patient turning inward on themselves over weeks, the room getting smaller around them, the family arriving in shifts, or whether it was going to come fast, in a hard afternoon, with the breath changing an hour before, and then a few minutes of the specific rattle, and then the room quiet, or whether it was going to come the third way, which was the hardest to name, the way where the patient hung on past when they should have gone. Days passed, weeks passed, the body refusing to release, until something finally gave, and the death when it came was small and grateful. She could feel it in the first minute. She had told a doctor about it once at Clarion Memorial in 2011. Dr. Wayland. He had asked her over coffee in the doctor's lounge how she did it, how she knew. She had tried to explain. He had listened. He had said at the end, in the careful voice of a physician talking to a nurse he respected, that what she was describing was probably a very fine attunement to clinical signs, respiratory rate, mucous membranes, capillary refill, the small physical language of a dying body that she was reading unconsciously. She had said, maybe, she had not told him about the smell. The smell was not clinical. It was not the smell of a dying body, which she knew and could put in categories. The ketosis smell of a diabetic near the end. The specific ammonia of failing kidneys. The sweet rot of a necrotic bowel. Those were smells you could name. What Alma smelled was underneath those. A smell that was in the air of the room itself, that had nothing to do with the patient. A specific dry, cold smell, like a stone floor that had never been walked on. She smelled it in some rooms and not others. When she smelled it, the patient was going. She was 54 now. She lived in a small ranch house on the outskirts of the town of Rimmersburg, on a 2-acre lot she had bought in 1998 when she and Cal had moved out from Pittsburgh. Cal had died in his sleep of a heart event in 2014, at 49, in the bedroom of that house, and Alma had gone to his side of the bed at 6 in the morning to bring him his coffee, and had known before she touched him, from the shape of the light in the room, that he was gone. She had put the coffee on the nightstand. She had sat with him for an hour before she called anyone. The smell had not been in the room that morning. That was the thing she thought about later. If the smell had been there, she would have gone to him earlier. She would have been sitting up. She would have been with him when he went. She had done hospice work in Clarion County for 11 years by then, and she had, in those 11 years, been in perhaps 200 rooms in which the smell was there. Every one of those patients had died within a week. Cal had died without her being warned. She had, in the years after, come to understand that the smell was not a warning for her. It was a marker that belonged to somebody else. And in the specific, hard hours of the summer of 2014, sitting alone on the porch of the ranch house outside Rimmersburg, with Cal's ashes in a wooden box beside her chair, Alma had made herself a quiet promise about her work. She had promised she would use the smell. She had promised she would use whatever she could see, and whatever she could hear, and whatever she could feel about the room she went into. And she would use it to make sure her patients had somebody with them when they went, that they were not alone. She had kept the promise for 11 years. She had gotten very good at her work. The story that follows started on the second Tuesday of April 2026, in a farmhouse on Rockland Road, 11 miles east of Rimmersburg, at a place called the Ellery Farm. She had been given the referral on the Monday. Male, 73. Congestive heart failure with pulmonary complications. Hospice eligible on the basis of a 6-month prognosis that had been extended twice already. His name was Owen Vinegar. He had been widowed for 19 years. His only son lived in Ohio and could not come out. There was a niece who came in from Clarion twice a week to help with meals. Otherwise, he was alone in the farmhouse. Alma had put his file on top of the stack in her truck and had driven out to Rockland Road on the Tuesday morning at 10. The farmhouse was old. White clapboard with a slate roof, on a rise looking out at a small hollow with a creek running through it. There was a barn behind the house that had not been used for cattle in maybe 20 years. There was a stand of maples along the drive that had been red when they were young and were mostly bare now, in April, before the leaf out. The grass in the yard was long. Somebody had cut it in the fall, but nobody had cut it since. She parked at the end of the drive and got out with her bag. The porch was old and sound. She walked up the 3 steps. The front door was open behind the screen. The screen was patched in one corner with a small square of new mesh where the wire had rusted through. Neat work. Somebody in the house had done small repairs recently. She knocked on the frame of the screen door. A voice from inside said, "Come on in." The voice was thin. It had the specific readiness of a man with fluid in his lungs. Alma opened the screen and stepped in. The front hall smelled like cooking. Not fresh cooking. The smell of a kitchen that had been used regularly for 50 years, and that carried the smell of every meal that had been made in it. Bread, bacon, coffee, butter. The specific rich smell of a farmhouse kitchen. She stood in the hall for a moment and let herself feel the room. Underneath the cooking smell was another smell. The other smell. It was there. Faint, but there. The dry, cold stone floor smell she knew. It was in this house. Alma stood in the hall and made herself take a slow breath in. She had, in the 11 years since Cal, walked into 247 rooms with the smell in them. She kept count. It was in a small notebook she kept in the glove compartment of her truck. She had come, in those years, to be able to walk into the smell without flinching. She flinched a little today. The Vinegar house had it. Owen Vinegar was going. She had come to a house on the 2nd Tuesday of April, and Owen Vinegar was in his last week. She walked down the hall. The kitchen was to the right. She could see through the doorway. A tidy kitchen, clean, the counters wiped. A coffee pot on the stove that was still warm. She could see the small residual steam coming off the spout. Somebody had made coffee for him that morning. The niece, probably. The parlor was to the left. She stopped at the doorway. Owen Vinegar was in an armchair by the window, wrapped in a wool blanket. He was small. That was the first thing. Not small the way a man is small at the end of a heart failure, though there was some of that too. He had been small his whole life, maybe 5'6". Thin, weathered, his hands on the arms of the chair were the hands of a man who had worked with them for 60 years. Big-knuckled, dry, marked with the small brown spots of age. He looked up at her. His eyes were clear. That was the second thing. She had gotten used to the eyes of the dying, the way they went inward in the last weeks, focused on something that was not in the room. Owen Vinegar's eyes were on her on the doorway of the parlor, seeing her clearly. He said, "You'll be Alma." She said, "Yes, Mr. Vinegar." He said, "Owen." She said, "Owen, it's good to meet you." He said, "You want coffee?" Ida made a pot before she left. "Ought to still be hot." She said, "In a minute. Let me sit with you first." She walked into the parlor and took the small ladder-back chair beside the armchair. She set her bag on the floor. She looked at him. The smell was stronger in the parlor. It was in the corner behind his chair. She looked at the corner. There was a shape there. Not a shadow, not an outline. A specific thing standing in the corner of the parlor of the Vinegar farmhouse, in the specific place where the northeast wall met the north wall, met the ceiling. A tall, thin shape, about 6 feet high, standing. It was made of what looked like slow smoke. It had no face and no arms. It had a sense of orientation. She could tell it was facing into the room, facing Owen. It did not move. It was waiting. Hannah had not seen it before. That was the third thing. She had been feeling the smell in rooms for 23 years. She had never, before this Tuesday morning in April of 2026, seen anything in a room. She had felt it. She had felt the specific attention of something in the room. She had smelled its cold. She had never seen a shape. The shape in the corner of Owen Vinegar's parlor was looking at Owen. Alma held very still in the ladder-back chair. She said, "Owen, how are you feeling today?" Owen said, "Tired." She said, "Sleep all right last night." He said, "In and out." He looked at her. He said, "You all right, Alma?" She said, "Yes. Just letting my eyes adjust to the light in here." He said, "It's dim. Ida keeps the curtain shut. Says the sun on my face gives me a headache." She said, "That's kind of her." She looked at him. She made herself smile. She looked back at the corner. The shape was still there. She looked at the floor between the shape and Owen's chair. Nothing between them. Just the wooden floor and a small rag rug of the sort that had been made by hand in western Pennsylvania in the 50s. She looked at Owen. She said, "Would you mind if I checked your pulse?" She reached across and put her fingers on his wrist. His pulse was fast, 112. His skin was cool. His nail beds were dusky. She said, "How's the shortness of breath today?" He said, "Not too bad if I don't move around." She said, "You've been getting up." He said, "To the bathroom. Not much beyond that." She said, "Any pain?" He said, "In my back. A little." She said, "Sharp or dull?" He said, "Dull, just a soreness." She said, "Okay." She kept her fingers on his wrist for another 20 seconds. She was not counting. She was looking at the corner. The shape did not move. She thought about it. She had been walking into the smell for 11 years and had, in that time, come to a specific practice. When she smelled the smell, she stayed. She did not do the brief clinical visit and leave. She sat with the patient. She held their hand. She asked about their life. She listened to their stories. She made sure they had somebody with them. She had, over the 11 years, kept 12 patients alive, an average of 11 days past, when the hospice medical director had expected them. 12 patients. 11 days. Because she had learned that the smell meant they were about to go, and had learned that patients with a compassionate presence in the room tended to hold on longer than patients without one. She had been praised for it. Her supervisor had used her example twice in continuing education sessions. She had been keeping people alive with her presence. She looked at the shape in the corner. She said, "Owen, would you tell me about the farm?" Owen said, "The farm's mostly gone. I sold off the land in 2004. Kept the house and the 2 acres. She said, "Tell me about the farm before that." Owen looked at her. He looked at his hands on the arms of the chair. He looked out the small gap in the curtain at the light coming through. He said, "My grandfather bought it in 1919. It was 78 acres then. Dairy. He had a herd of Guernseys." She said, "Go on." He said, "You want to hear about the farm?" She said, "I do." He said, "All right." He told her about the farm. He told her about his grandfather bringing the herd in from Ohio in a boxcar in the summer of 1919 and driving them up from the rail spur in Clarion. He told her about his father taking over the farm in 1948 and about the small dairy building his father had put up in 1952 with concrete he had mixed himself. He told her about growing up in the house, being a boy in a farmhouse in western Pennsylvania in the 50s. He told her about milking at 4 in the morning in the winter, in the dark, in the specific cold of a January morning in Clarion County, when your breath froze on the wire brush you used to clean the milking cups. Alma listened. She kept her fingers on his wrist. She did not look at the corner. After she had been listening for about 40 minutes, she looked at the corner. The shape had moved. It had moved a foot toward the door. It had moved away from Owen. Owen was still talking. He had gotten to the specific summer of 1962, when he had been 10 and had been given his own calf to raise. The calf's name had been Bluebell. She had grown up into the best cow on the farm and had produced for 12 years. She had been slaughtered in 1974 when Owen had been 22, off at college, and had come home for the summer. And his father had told him that Bluebell had come to the end of her useful life. Emma listened. The shape at the corner of the parlor of the Vinegar farmhouse moved a further 6 inches toward the door. She stayed for 2 more hours. She heard about the college years, about Owen meeting a woman named Denise Coombs at a dance in Clarion in 1972, about the wedding, about the birth of Doyle, their only son, in 1976. She heard about Denise dying of ovarian cancer in 2007. She heard about the small, quiet years after, when Owen had lived alone in the house with the dog, an old collie named Rennie, who had died in 2019. She heard about Owen's own diagnosis in 2023. By the time she stood up to leave, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the shape in the corner of the parlor had withdrawn to the far corner of the room, was smaller than it had been when she came in, and was, she thought, looking at the wall instead of at Owen. She said, "I'll come back on Thursday." Owen said, "That was more of a visit than I expected." She said, "It was a good visit." He said, "It was." He looked at her. He said, "You're doing your job well, Alma." She said, "I'm trying to." She left. She sat in her truck at the end of the drive for a long time before she drove away. She went home that evening and sat at her kitchen table with her small notebook. The notebook had a list of the patients with the smell, 247 entries going back to 2015 when she had started keeping it. Beside each name was a date, the date she had first walked into the room with the smell. And beside that, A second date. The date the patient had died. The gap between the two dates was, on average, 5 days. For the 12 patients she had held on to, it had been 16. She added Owen Vinegar to the bottom of the list. She wrote in the first date. She left the second one blank. Then she opened the notebook to a fresh page and, in her small, careful hand, wrote a new heading. Shape. Under that she wrote, Owen Vinegar. Farmhouse on Rockland Road, Tuesday, 8 April 2026. First visit. Shape in northeast corner of parlor. Approx 6 foot dark. No face. Withdrew during conversation. She sat looking at the entry for a long time. She had never seen anything before. She had been in the smell for 11 years, and she had never seen anything. She had thought about it. She had considered whether her sense of the smell was maybe the beginning of something. Maybe some slow shift in her perception. Maybe the way a person who has done hospice work for a long time starts to see things that are not there. She had considered whether she was, in the small, quiet way, losing her grip. She was not losing her grip. She could feel her grip. She was 54, and she was in the best professional condition of her life. Her work was clean. She had come home tonight, made herself supper, sat at her table. The shape had been there. She was sure. She wrote, under the entry, shape withdrew as I stayed. Same effect as smell, presence in room correlates with extension of life. She looked at that. Then she wrote, below it, am I doing the right thing? She looked at that sentence for a long time. Then she closed the notebook. She put it in the drawer of her kitchen table. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. She went out on the Thursday morning at 10. The drive out to Rockland Road took 22 minutes. She played the radio. She did not think about the shape. She thought about the appointment. She thought about the questions she would ask Owen about his medications, about his food intake, about whether he was managing to bathe. She thought about the specific practical work of a hospice nurse doing a second visit. She got to the farmhouse. She parked at the end of the drive. She sat in the truck for a moment. Then she got out and walked up to the porch. Ida was at the door. Ida was Owen's niece. She was maybe 48, big-boned, wearing a heavy blue sweater over a plaid shirt. She had a purse over her shoulder. She was on her way out. Ida said, Nurse Reed. Helma said, Ida said, he's had a hard night, real hard. Helma said, the breathing. Ida said, the breathing. And he was seeing things. Talking to Denise. Talking to somebody named Rennie. Rennie was the dog. Alma said, that's not unusual in the stage he's in. Ida said, I know. I've been through this. My mother went 2 years ago. She looked at Alma. She said, is it soon? Alma said, it could be. Ida said, how soon? Alma said, I couldn't say, Ida, but I'll sit with him a while today. Ida said, I got to go to work. I got to be at the mill at 11. Alma said, you go on. Ida said, I'll be back at 6 to fix his supper. Alma said, I'll stay till you get back. Ida looked at her. Her face was tired. She said, that's more than the schedule calls for. Alma said, it's the visit he needs today. Ida said, all right. She went to her car. Alma went in the house. The parlor was dim. Owen was in the armchair. The wool blanket was pulled up higher to his shoulders. His face was gray. His breathing was audible from the doorway, a small wet catch on each inhale. The shape in the corner was bigger. That was the first thing. It had grown since Tuesday. It was now maybe 7 feet tall. It filled the corner from floor to ceiling. It was no longer just standing in the corner. It was leaning slightly forward, toward Owen. The sense of attention was stronger. It was not smoke now. It was more solid. Alma could see, in the shape, the suggestion of a body. Shoulders, a head shape. Something that might have been an arm hanging at its side. The smell in the parlor was thicker. It was in the back of her throat. Owen turned his head to look at her. His eyes were still clear, but there was something behind them now. He said, "Alma, you came back." She said, "I said I would." He said, "I thought you might not." She said, "Why?" He said, "I don't know. I had bad dreams last night." She said, "Tell me." He said, "I was in the barn. It was cold. There was somebody in the barn with me. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them." She said, "That sounds like a hard dream." He said, "It wasn't a dream, Alma." She sat in the ladder-back chair. She said, "Tell me what happened." He told her. He had gone to sleep at 9. He had woken at 2 in the morning. He had been in his bedroom, upstairs, alone. But he had been in the barn, not remembered being in the barn. Been in the barn. He had felt the cold cement of the barn floor under his feet. He had felt the specific dry smell of hay that had been stored in the barn since the 70s, and had gone slowly to dust. He had felt somebody in the barn with him. He had, in the dream that was not a dream, tried to turn on the light. There had been no light. He had tried to walk to the door. He could not find the door. He had, in the specific way of dreams, understood that the barn had become bigger than it had been in life. It had gone on for a long way, in every direction. He had, in the specific way of dreams, understood that the somebody in the barn was moving toward him. He had woken up in his bed at 2 in the morning with the sheets soaked in sweat. He had not gone back to sleep. Alma listened. She did not look at the corner. She could feel the shape there. It was pulled toward Owen the way water is pulled toward a drain. She could feel the small, quiet pressure of its attention. She said, "Owen, I want to stay with you today. I'll be here till Ida gets home at 6. Owen said, "That's a lot to ask." She said, "It's not asking. I'm going to stay." He said, "All right, Alma." She said, "Have you eaten today?" He said, "Ida brought me a piece of toast this morning. I couldn't get it down." She said, "Let me make you some soup. Something you can sip." He said, "There's a can of chicken noodle in the pantry." She said, "That'll do." She went to the kitchen. The kitchen was to the right of the front hall. She stood at the doorway and looked at the pantry, which was a small cupboard beside the stove. She got the can. She got a saucepan. She got a can opener. She opened the can. She poured the soup into the pan. She put the pan on the burner and turned the heat on low. While the soup heated, she stood in the kitchen and let herself feel the house. The smell was strongest in the parlor, where Owen was. But it was in the rest of the house, too, thin, like a smell that had settled in the walls. Hammond leaned on the counter. She was not, she told herself, going to be afraid. She had been in hospice for 23 years. She had been in the smell for 11 of them. She had, in her whole career, sat with more than 300 patients as they died. She had seen every shape of death that a body could take. She was not going to be afraid of a shape in the corner of a parlor in a farmhouse on Rockland Road. She took the soup off the burner. She poured it into a mug. She got a spoon from the drawer. She carried the mug to the parlor. The shape was still in the corner. It had not moved. She set the mug on the small table beside Owen's chair. She helped him sit up. She held the mug for him. He drank 3 small sips. He said, "I can't do more." She said, "That's enough." She set the mug back on the table. She said, "Owen, would you like to tell me about Denise?" He looked at her. He said, "You want to hear about Denise?" She said, "I do." He said, "Denise was the best woman I ever knew." She said, "Tell me why." He told her. He told her for 2 hours. He told her about the first time he saw Denise at the dance in Clarion in 1972 and the specific green dress she had worn. He told her about the first 6 months of their marriage, about the small apartment above the hardware store in Rimmersburg where they had lived while he was still working at the mill and had not yet come back to the farm. He told her about the years of trying to have a baby, and about Doyle finally coming in 1976, when Denise was 30. He told her about the way Denise had gone at the end in 2007 of the cancer, and about how she had, on the last day, when she had been past being able to speak, held his hand for 4 hours. Hannah listened. The shape in the corner grew smaller as he talked. Not smaller in the sense of receding to the wall, smaller in the sense of thinner, less solid. It was almost translucent by the time Owen finished. She could see the flowered wallpaper behind it. Owen had, at the end of the story about Denise, cried a little. He had wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He had said, "I'm sorry, Alma." She had said, "You don't have to be sorry." He had said, "I don't often talk about her." She had said it was a good story. He had said, "It was, wasn't it?" She had said, "It was." Ida came home at 6:10. Alma had, in the 4 hours between the soup and Ida coming home, gotten Owen to eat a piece of buttered bread and to drink half a glass of ginger ale and to take his evening medications. She had helped him to the bathroom. She had walked him back to his chair. She had sat with him. He had dozed for about 40 minutes. She had watched him breathe. When Ida came in, Helma stood up. The shape in the corner was almost invisible. Ida said, "How is he?" Alma said, "He's had a better afternoon. He ate a little. He talked to me about Denise." Ida said, "That's good." Ida looked at Owen. Owen was awake now. He was looking at Ida with the small, tender attention of a man looking at his brother's daughter, who had been coming to help him for the last 8 months, and would be with him when he went. Ida said, "Uncle Owen." Owen said, "Hi, Ida." Ida said, "You feel like some supper?" Owen said, "A little." Ida turned to Alma. She said, "Thank you, Nurse Reed." Alma said, "Alma, please." Ida said, "Thank you, Alma." Alma said, "I'll be back on Saturday." Owen said, "Come tomorrow." Alma looked at him. She said, "Tomorrow's Friday. I'm not scheduled to see you tomorrow, but I could come out." Owen said, "Come out." "Alma," she said, "I will." She left. She drove home in the dusk. She played the radio. She did not think. She thought about the road. At home, she sat at her kitchen table. She opened the notebook. She wrote. Under the second visit entry, shape grew larger, then smaller through the visit. Owen reports night episode of feeling somebody in the barn. He was frightened. She looked at that. She wrote, The shape did not withdraw all the way today. It got thin, almost invisible, but it stayed in the room. She looked at that. She wrote, "If I had not been there today, Owen would have gone." She looked at that. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. She went out on the Friday, and on the Saturday, and on the Sunday. She was there each day. She sat with him. She listened. She got him to eat a little. She helped him to the bathroom. She held his hand when he dozed. She was the reason he was still alive on the Sunday afternoon. She knew that. By Sunday afternoon, the shape in the corner had grown back to its Tuesday size and was solid again. It was looking at Owen. It was. When Alma stopped listening to Owen's stories and let herself feel the room, giving off the same specific attention it had given off on the Tuesday, when she had first walked into the parlor. Owen was worse. He was not eating. He was breathing hard. Ida had asked her on the Saturday if it was time to talk about morphine. Alma had said it was. Alma had started the morphine on the Sunday morning. She had shown Ida how to give it. She had left the syringe pack in the small carved box on the side table by Owen's chair. By the Sunday afternoon, Owen was in and out. He was mostly out. When he was in, he was seeing things. Denise, the dog Rennie, his mother. He was talking to them. He said once, "At 3 in the afternoon, Mama, is it time?" Alma sat beside him. The shape in the corner did not move. It had not moved from the corner since Sunday morning. It was standing in the specific place, looking at Owen. Alma sat with him. She held his hand. She did not talk. She just held his hand and watched him breathe. At about 5 in the afternoon, Owen came back to himself for a moment. He turned his head and looked at her. He said, "Alma," she said, "I'm here." He said, "Something's in the room." She said, "I know, Owen." He said, "In the corner." She said, "I know." He said, "You can see it." She said, "I can see it." He said, "What is it?" She said, "I don't know." He said, "It's been there since Tuesday." She said, "It has." He said, "It's waiting." She said, "I think it is." He said, "For me." She said, "Owen, I don't know." He said, "It scares me, Alma." She said, "I know." She said, "That's why I've been staying." He said, "You've been keeping it back." She said, "I don't know if that's what I've been doing." He said, "I do." He closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them. He said, "Alma," she said, "Yes." He said, "Don't let it get me." She said, "Owen," he said, "Don't let it. Please." She said, "I won't." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were clear. Then he closed them. Alma sat beside him. The shape in the corner did not move. She did not go home that night. Ida stayed too. They took turns sitting with him. Ida in the way of a niece keeping the vigil, Alma in the way of a hospice nurse keeping the vigil, both of them present. At about 11 in the evening, Ida went to lie down in the small guest bedroom off the parlor. She said she would be up in an hour to relieve Alma. Alma said take longer. Ida said thank you. Ida went to lie down. Alma sat beside Owen in the ladder-back chair. The house was quiet. The parlor was lit by one small lamp on the side table, next to the morphine box. The lamp had a pale amber shade. The light was warm on Owen's face. His face was small in the light. He had, over the 6 days, come down. He was smaller than he had been on the Tuesday morning. His face had the specific inward look of a face at the end. He was breathing in the specific pattern that meant he was close. Not the rattle. Not yet. The pattern before the rattle. Slow, shallow, with the small pauses between. The shape in the corner was watching him. Hamma sat in the ladder-back chair and held Owen's hand. She looked at the shape. She had been looking at it for 6 days. She had not, in the 6 days, allowed herself to look at it fully. She had let herself see it in her peripheral vision. She had not turned her head and let herself see it. Now she did. She turned her head. She looked at the shape. It was solid now. It was a body. It had shoulders. It had a head shape. The head shape had a specific curve to it that suggested a face, though there was no face. She looked at it. It looked back at her. She felt it look at her. She had not felt it look at her before. It had, in the 6 days, only ever looked at Owen. Now it looked at her. She held Owen's hand. She looked at the shape. She was. In the small hours of the Sunday night going on Monday morning of the 12th of April into the 13th, 2026, in the parlor of the Vinegar Farmhouse on Rockland Road, holding the hand of a dying man, looking at a shape that was looking back at her. She was not afraid. That was the thing. She had thought she would be afraid. She had, in her life, been afraid of a very small number of things. Of Cal dying, when he had, and of what her life was going to be after. She had, in the small hours since, been afraid of other things. She had thought that a shape in the corner of a parlor with a body and a head and something that might be a face would be terrifying. It was not. It was tired. That was what came off of it when she let herself look at it. The specific tiredness of a thing that has been holding a position for a very long time. She looked at Owen's face. Then she looked past him, at the wall on the far side of the parlor. She could see, on the wall, in the specific dim light of the small lamp, with the amber shade, the small, quiet shape of something that was not the shape in the corner. It was on the wall. It was faint. It was... Hamma had to look at it for a moment before she understood what she was looking at. It was the outline of a hand pressed against the wall from the other side, the wall of the parlor, the other side of which was the outdoors. There was no other side. There was the wallpaper, and the lath, and the clapboard, and the outdoors. There was no other side for a hand to be pressing against the wall from. But there was a hand pressing against the wall. Hammond looked at it. It was a large hand. A big hand. Splayed, pressed hard against the wall. From the outside, or from what should have been the outside, so that the outline of it showed faintly through the wallpaper, as if the wall were thin, as if the wall were a curtain, and something on the other side of the curtain was pressing its hand against it. The hand moved. The fingers flexed. They dug into the wall. The wall did not move. But the hand was working at the wall, like a hand pushing at a door that was locked, like a hand looking for a latch. Hammond looked at the shape in the corner. The shape was looking at the wall now, not at her, at the wall, at the place where the hand was pressing. Hamma understood, in the small hours of the Monday morning of the 13th of April 2026, that she had been getting it wrong. The shape in the corner was not there to take Owen. The shape in the corner was standing between Owen and something else. The shape was a door. It was a specific presence in the corner of the room, holding a specific position, holding a door closed against something that was on the other side, something that had been working at the door for 6 days, something that was working at the door harder now. Owen was not going to go with the shape. If the shape stopped holding the door, Owen was going to be taken by the thing on the other side. Alma had spent 6 days keeping Owen alive. She had, without meaning to, given the thing on the other side of the wall 6 days to work at the door. 6 days to find purchase. 6 days to press its hand through the wallpaper and to look for the latch. She had been protecting him from something that was going to save him. She sat in the ladder-back chair with Owen's hand in her hand. She looked at the shape in the corner. The shape looked back at her. She could feel it now, more clearly than she had been able to at any point in the 6 days. She could feel what it was. It was Denise. It was Denise Vinegar, dead of ovarian cancer in 2007, standing in the corner of the parlor for 6 days, holding a door closed against something that had come for Owen and had been trying to get to him. She had been there since the smell had come into the house. She was tired. She had been holding the door for a long time, and she needed to let go and let Owen come to her before the door gave way. Hammond looked at Owen's face. He was gray. His breathing had shallowed further. He was very close. She looked at the wall. The hand was still there. It was pressing harder. She could see the pressure of the fingertips through the wallpaper. The wallpaper was, in the specific dim amber light of the small lamp, distorting a little around the fingertips, bending inward. The wall was going to give. Hamma stood up. She let go of Owen's hand. She walked to the corner of the parlor. She stood in front of the shape. She said, out loud, in the parlor, at 11:42 on the Sunday night, going on Monday of the 12th of April, 2026, in the small farmhouse on Rockland Road, Denise. The shape did not move. But Alma felt the specific attention of it. She understood, being looked at from the inside of the shape. She said, Denise, I've been keeping him. She said, I didn't understand. She said, I'll let him go now. She turned around. She walked back to the ladder-back chair. She sat down. She took Owen's hand. She said, Owen said, in a voice she could barely hear, Alma, she said, Owen, it's all right. You can go now. Denise is here for you. Owen opened his eyes. He looked at her. He said, in the small, clear voice of a man who was seeing the room properly again, Denise, she said, she's in the corner. He turned his head to look. He saw her. He said, oh, Denise. His face changed. The tiredness went out of it. He looked for a moment like the young man who had seen a woman in a green dress at a dance in Clarion in 1972. His eyes were wet. Alma said, it's all right, Owen. You can go. She looked at the shape in the corner. The shape stepped forward. It came out of the corner. It walked in the specific way of a body walking, across the small distance between the corner and Owen's armchair. It stopped beside the chair, and as it stopped, it changed. It was no longer smoke and shadow. It was Denise. A woman in a simple blue dress, about 60, her gray hair pinned back, her hand held out. She held out her hand to Owen. Owen looked at her. He said, Denise, I've missed you so much. Denise said, in a voice that was very quiet, that Alma could hear only because she was leaning close. I know, Owen, come on. I've got you. Owen took Denise's hand. He looked at Alma. He said, Alma, thank you. Alma said, "Go on, Owen." He looked at Denise. His face was full of light. He was, in the last moment, a young man again. Then he closed his eyes. His hand went slack in Alma's hand. Denise did not disappear. She stood by the chair. She looked at Alma. Alma looked back at her. Denise smiled. A small, tired smile. The smile of a woman who has done a long job. Then she looked past Alma, at the wall. The hand on the wall was gone. The wall was just the wall. The wallpaper was smooth. There was no hand pressing on it. There was no outline. There was no pressure. Whatever had been on the other side had, when Denise had let go of the door and had come to Owen, had gone. Not gone through, just gone. Whatever it was, it had needed Owen alive to have him. Once he was gone with Denise, there had been nothing for it to work at. Denise looked back at Alma. She said, in the same very quiet voice, "Thank you for letting me go, dear," Alma said. "I'm sorry it took so long." Denise said, "You didn't know." Alma said, "I do now." Denise said, "I know you do." She looked at Owen. He was slumped in the chair. His face was peaceful. His hand was still in Alma's hand. Denise said, "He was a good man." Alma said, "He told me." Denise said, "He talked about me." Alma said, "For 2 hours on Thursday." Denise smiled again. The small, tired smile. Then she said, "Alma." Alma said, "Yes." Denise said, "The next one you get. If you smell the smell but you don't see a shape, then it's just the ordinary going. Sit with them. Hold them. That's what they need." She said, "But if you see a shape, if you see somebody standing in the room, then you let them go, as fast as you can, because the shape is there to keep them safe, and the shape is tired, and the shape can't hold forever." Alma said, "How do I tell the difference?" Denise said, "The shape is somebody. The other kind isn't. That's the difference." She looked at Owen one more time. Then she went. She did not fade. She did not dissolve. She was there, and then she was not there. The corner of the parlor was empty. The wall was smooth. The room was still. Alma sat in the ladder-back chair holding a dead man's hand. The small amber lamp on the side table cast its light on Owen's face. She sat with him for a long time. Then she stood up. She let go of his hand. She walked to the door of the parlor. She stood at the door and looked back at the room. Owen in the chair. The blanket over his knees. The small pine table with the amber lamp. The empty corner. She walked down the hall to the small guest bedroom where Ida was sleeping. She knocked softly. Ida sat up. Alma said, "Ida, he's gone." Ida said, "When?" Alma said, "A few minutes ago." Ida said, "Was he in pain?" Alma said, "No, he was talking to Denise." Ida looked at her. She said, "That's good." She got up and put on her cardigan and went out of the room and down the hall to the parlor. Alma stood at the door of the guest bedroom for a moment. Then she followed Ida. She drove home at 4 in the morning. The road from Rockland Road to Rimmersburg was empty in the specific way rural western Pennsylvania is empty at 4 in the morning. She drove at the speed limit. She did not play the radio. She got home. She parked in her driveway. She got out. She stood in the small, quiet dark of her front yard and looked at the sky. The sky in April in Clarion County at 4 in the morning was clear and cold. The stars were out. A few crickets were going in the tall grass at the edge of the yard. The specific quiet of a rural western Pennsylvania morning in early spring. She stood there for a long time. Then she went inside. She sat at her kitchen table. She opened a notebook. She wrote, at the top of a fresh page, in her small, careful hand, Owen Vinegar died at approximately 11:47 p.m. on Sunday, 12 April 2026. Time of death, 11:52. He was in his chair in the parlor. His niece Ida Vinegar was in the guest bedroom. Below that she wrote, Denise Vinegar was in the room with him. She looked at that sentence for a long time. Then she wrote, below it, Denise had been holding a door closed against something for 6 days. I did not understand this. I kept Owen alive for 6 days by sitting with him and by giving him my presence. And in doing so, I gave the thing on the other side of the door 6 days to work at it. If I had not been there, Owen would have gone on Tuesday afternoon with Denise. He would have been all right. Instead, he almost was not. She looked at that. She wrote, I have been getting my whole practice backwards. She looked at that. She wrote, the patients I keep alive with my presence, I have to look at them. Really look. If somebody's in the room with them, waiting, then that person is there to take them safely, and I have to let them go. I have to sit with them, and I have to hold their hand, and I have to tell them it is all right, but I must not keep them longer than they need to be kept. The patients without somebody in the room, those are the ones I hold. Those are the ones where my presence gives them time to finish what they need to finish. Those are the ones the smell is for. The smell is a marker. It marks the room. It is not a warning of imminent death. It is a signal that the going has begun. What happens after is up to me, and up to who is in the room with them. I have been getting it backwards for 11 years. She sat with that. She thought about the 12 patients she had kept alive, an average of 11 extra days. She thought about whether any of them had had a shape in the corner. She thought about it hard. She tried to remember the corners of the rooms. She could not remember. She had not been looking. She thought about whether any of them had gone the wrong way. She did not know. She was going to have to sit with that. She was 54. She had been doing this work for 23 years. 11 of those years, she had been reading the smell, but had been reading it wrong. She wrote in the notebook, at the bottom of the page, in her small, careful hand, I do not know how many of them I have hurt. I will not know. I will not be able to find out. But, going forward, I will look at the corners. I will read the rooms. I will do the work the way it should be done. That is what I can do. She closed the notebook. She put it in the drawer. She went to the front door and stood in the open doorway of her small ranch house on the outskirts of Rimmersburg and looked out at the dawn. The dawn was coming up over the ridge to the east. The sky was going from black to gray to the specific slow pink of a Pennsylvania spring morning. A cardinal was calling somewhere in the yard. Cal was not in the doorway with her. Cal had been dead for 12 years. Cal had died in his sleep at 49 and had gone on. And the smell had not been in the bedroom that morning because there had been nothing to mark. Cal had gone the way she had wanted. In his sleep, unafraid, Cal had, in the small, quiet way, had a good death. Alma stood in the doorway. She thought, in the small, quiet way she thought about things, that she was going to keep doing the work. She was going to keep going out to the farmhouses and the trailers and the clapboard houses in the towns of Clarion County. She was going to sit with the patients who did not have somebody in the corner, and she was going to give them her presence, and she was going to give them the time to finish what they needed to finish. And the patients who did have somebody in the corner, she was going to let them go. She was going to sit with them and hold their hand and tell them it was all right. And she was going to watch the shape in the corner step forward and become somebody they had loved. And she was going to let them take the patient's hand. And she was going to sit with the empty room after. She was going to do it right for the rest of her working life. She was 54. She had, if she was going to work until 65, 11 more years. 11 years to make up for 11 years. That was the math. It was not going to be enough. But it was what she had. Alma Reed stood in the doorway of her small ranch house at 4:30 in the morning on Monday, the 13th of April, 2026, and watched the sun come up over Clarion County. Somewhere on Rockland Road, in the farmhouse with the slate roof, Ida Vinegar was sitting in the parlor beside her uncle, waiting for the funeral home. The shape in the corner was gone. Denise had, after 11 years of holding a door, gone through it with Owen. She had gone home. Alma thought about that. She went inside. She made coffee. She sat at the table with the coffee and the notebook and looked at the careful hand of a woman who had been getting her work backwards for 11 years and was going to spend the rest of her life getting it right. She drank the coffee. At 6, she called the office. She told them she was taking a personal day. Then she called them back and said she would work. She was on the schedule for the Robinson visit at 10. She was going to keep the appointment. At 9:45, she got in the truck. She drove out. Mrs. Robinson lived in a small trailer on a lot near Turkey City. Alma knocked on the door. Mrs. Robinson's daughter let her in. Alma walked into the small living room of the trailer. Mrs. Robinson was in a chair by the window, breathing on oxygen. Alma smelled the smell. It was there. Faint, she was going. Alma looked at the corners. She looked at each one carefully. The northeast corner was empty. The southeast corner was empty. The southwest corner was empty. The northwest corner was empty. Alma took the small ladder-back chair beside Mrs. Robinson's armchair. She sat down. She said, "Mrs. Robinson, it's good to see you. My name is Alma. Would you like to tell me about your life?" Mrs. Robinson looked at her. "Mrs. Robinson said, in a voice that was very thin, 'You want to hear about my life?' Alma said, 'I would.' Mrs. Robinson said, 'All right.' She began to talk. Alma sat and listened. She held Mrs. Robinson's hand. She was, in the small, quiet way, doing her work. The corners were empty. She was going to sit with Mrs. Robinson for as long as Mrs. Robinson needed. She was going to give Mrs. Robinson the days. Kel Bristow had been a smoke jumper out of the McGrath base for 16 seasons, and on the 3rd of September 2026, at 7:40 in the morning, he stepped out of a Twin Otter at 2,200 feet above a burn scar on the north bank of the Nowitna River and free fell for 11 seconds before he pulled his ripcord. The chute caught. His harness bit into his shoulders. He looked down at the burn coming up under his boots. 63 acres of black spruce and tussock that had been running crown fire 11 days earlier, and had been contained by an 8-man crew in 3 days of hard cut-line work, and now needed a mop-up before the season ended and the ground froze. The burn was low priority. 2, maybe 3 days of walking the perimeter, cold trailing the edge, dropping any snags that could reflash. Cake work. He had done it 100 times. He hit the ground at the north end of the drop zone in a controlled roll and came up on his feet. He gathered his chute in 3 practiced motions. He stripped his jumpsuit and stuffed it in his gear bag. He was wearing his Nomex under the suit, the yellow shirt, the green pants, the leather boots he had bought new for the 2019 season and had resoled twice. He put on his hard hat. He shouldered his pack. He picked up his Pulaski. He looked around the drop zone. The other 5 were already down. He could see 3 of them 50 yards south at the edge of the burn. Rannick and Corliss and the new man. Dobbs, 2 more chutes were coming down further south. That would be Vela and Boggs. He walked over to them. Rannick was the second in command. 12 seasons out of Fairbanks, 1 at McGrath, 38 years old, calm the way you had to be calm to do the job. He looked up when Kell came over. He said, "Good drop." Kell said, "Good drop." He looked at the burn. In the sunlight of a late September morning in the Alaskan interior, it was black and blue-gray. The black of the burned duff and the gray of the standing snag trees, going a long way in every direction. The Nowitna was to the south, a bright line at the edge of vision. To the north, the burn ran up a low ridge and disappeared over the top of it. Behind the ridge was empty country. He had walked it once, on a mop-up in 2019, before his shoulder had needed the second surgery. He knew what was up there. Muskeg burn and low taiga going 180 miles to the Kuskokwim. Kell said, "I'll take the north perimeter." Rannick said, "That's the long side." Kell said, "I know." Rannick looked at him. He said, "That's the long side alone," Kell said. "I'll be back at the drop zone by 1700. If I'm not, come get me." Rannick said, "You want to take Dobbs. He's here to learn." Kell said, "Not on the long side. He'll slow me. Take him on the south." Rannick said, "All right, Kell." Kell shouldered his pack. He set his sat phone in his chest pocket, tested it, closed it. He set his radio to channel 1 and clipped it. He took a swallow from his hydration bladder, 3 liters of water, filled at the McGrath base at 4:30 that morning. He pulled his gloves on. He said, "Radio check at 0900. Rannick said, 0900. Kell walked north. The burn under his boots crunched. Late season burn, dry, the duff carbonized down to about 2 inches. The ground was uneven under it, tussocks under the ash, and the roots of the burned spruce still holding shape, and here and there a spot where the ground was still warm from a smolder that had gone out only in the last day. He watched for those. That was the whole job. Find the warm spots. Break them open with the Pulaski. Turn them cold. He walked for an hour. He found 4 smolders, all small, all cold trailed easily. He radioed in at 0900. Rannick answered on channel 1. Nothing to report on the south. Good copy on the north. He kept walking. At about 10:15, he crested the low ridge on the north edge of the burn scar. He stopped at the top and drank from the bladder. He looked north. The burn ran another quarter-mile down the far side of the ridge and stopped at a natural break, a wet muskeg that the fire had not crossed. Beyond the muskeg was live forest, green spruce and cottonwood going up into the low taiga. The country was empty. He could see maybe 11 miles from the ridge. No smoke. No movement. The specific empty of interior Alaska in September. He was going to walk the burn edge along the ridge to the west for about 2 miles, then swing south down the west edge of the scar and be back at the drop zone by 5. He had done longer perimeters. He was, at 41, in the best condition of any smoke jumper based out of McGrath. He ran 14 miles a week in the off-season. He carried 100 pounds on his back on training days without breathing hard. He was one of the best in the region, and he knew it. He started west along the ridge. Then he saw the figure. It was ahead of him on the ridge, maybe half a mile, walking west at the same pace he had been walking. Yellow Nomex, hard hat, pack, same kit he was wearing, same speed. Kell stopped. He counted the crew in his head. Rannick, Corliss, Dobbs, Vila, Boggs, 5 men and 1 woman. Vila was the woman. They were all south of him. Rannick had confirmed nothing north on the last radio check. He unclipped the radio. He said on Channel 1, Kell to Rannick, "I've got a visual on somebody north of me on the ridge, about half a mile ahead, in Nomex. You copy?" "Static," he said. "Rannick, come back." "Static." He clicked to Channel 2. He said, "Kell to Rannick, come back." "Static." He looked at the radio. He clicked back to Channel 1. He tried again. Nothing. He looked at the figure. It was still there, still walking west at the same pace. It had not turned around. It had not slowed. Kell was, on the ordinary reckoning of a smoke jumper, on a mop-up in the Alaskan interior, in a situation he did not have a category for. He had never seen another firefighter that was not part of his own crew in this country. He was 78 miles from the McGrath base and 43 miles from the nearest native village, and there were no other crews on any burn within 100 miles of him on the 3rd of September, 2026, he said. Out loud, "Who are you?" The figure did not turn around. Kell started walking again. He kept his eyes on the figure. He walked at his own pace, a fast walk, about 4 miles an hour on the ridge. The figure walked at the same pace. The distance between them did not change. Kell walked for 10 minutes. The distance did not change. He tried the radio again. Static on both channels. He tried the sat phone. He pulled it from his chest pocket, powered it up. It came on. He looked for a signal. 3 seconds. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. No signal. He powered it down and powered it back up. Same. No signal. He put the phone back in his pocket. He sped up. He went from a fast walk to a jog. His pack, 38 pounds with the Pulaski and the chainsaw and the fusees and the fire shelter and the water, thumped against his back with each step. The ridge under his boots was uneven. He watched his footing. He kept his eyes on the figure. The figure sped up. It went from a walk to a jog at the same speed. The distance stayed exactly half a mile. Kell stopped. The figure stopped. Kell's breath was coming a little faster. He was not winded. He had been running at a moderate pace for maybe 2 minutes on uneven ground with a pack, and he was not winded. He was in the best condition of any smoke jumper based out of McGrath. His resting heart rate was 52. He said out loud, "Turn around." The figure did not turn around. Kel tried the radio again. Static. He tried the sat phone again. No signal. He looked at the sky. He looked at the ridge behind him. He looked at the burn to the south. He looked at the figure ahead of him. He said, "All right." He started walking again. He kept the pace steady. 4 miles an hour on the ridge. He was going to get to the figure. That was the plan. He was going to walk until he closed the distance, and when he closed the distance, he was going to see who this was, and then he was going to figure out what to do next. He walked for 40 minutes. The distance did not change. He tried the radio at 1100 at the scheduled check-in. In. Static on channel 1. Static on channel 2. He said Rannick's name 6 times. Nothing came back. He kept walking. At about 11:45, the figure did the first strange thing. It was walking ahead of him on the ridge. Kel was watching it. Its stride was steady. Then, without stopping, without turning, the figure went backwards. Not turned. Went. Its feet kept moving forward. Kel could see them, one after the other, in the walking motion. But the ground under the figure moved the wrong way. The figure went west at the same rate. But its feet were moving as if it were still going east. It walked west for about 11 paces this way. Then its feet reversed, and the motion of its feet lined up with the motion across the ground again. Kel stopped. He blinked. He looked at the figure. He waited. The figure kept walking. Normal now, feet moving forward, ground going by under it in the ordinary way of walking. Kel said out loud, in the specific quiet way a man says a thing to himself, when he has just seen something he does not have a category for. No. He kept walking. He was not, he told himself, going to have seen what he had just seen. He had been on the burn since 7:40. He had walked 3 hours in the sun on uneven ground with a pack. He had eaten a piece of jerky and half a granola bar at 0900, and he had drunk about 1 liter of water. He was in fine physical shape, but the eyes played tricks in the burn. The heat coming off the black duff distorted things. He had seen mirages in the burn before. He kept walking. He tried the radio at 1200. Static at 12:15, the figure did the second strange thing. It bent over. Not stopped, and bent over. Bent over while walking. Its torso came forward and down until its palms touched the ground. It kept moving. It was walking on all 4 limbs now, palms and feet, in a specific human shape that was moving on 4 points instead of 2. The stride did not change. The speed did not change. The distance between them did not change. It walked on all 4 limbs for about 100 yards. Then its torso came back up, and it was walking on 2 again. Kel stopped. He stood on the ridge in the sun of noon on the 3rd of September 2026, and he looked at the figure ahead of him, and he made himself say, out loud, "That was not what I saw." The figure kept walking. Kel stood there for a full minute. Then he said, "All right." He unshouldered his pack. He set it on the burn. He knelt beside it. He took out the sat phone again. He powered it up. He waited for the signal. Nothing. He put the sat phone in his chest pocket. He took out the radio. He tried channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4. He knew there was nothing on channels 3 and 4, but he tried them anyway. Nothing on any of them. No static, even, on 3 and 4. Silence. He put the radio in his belt. He drank from the hydration bladder. He drank about a third of a liter. He looked at the figure. The figure had stopped when he had stopped. It was standing ahead of him on the ridge, facing west, not looking back. Kell said, "I am going to break off. I am going to go south." Back to the drop zone. The figure did not respond. He said out loud to himself, "I am going to walk south. If it follows, I will know what it is doing." He shouldered his pack. He turned 90 degrees to his left. He started walking south, back across the ridge, back toward the burn scar and the drop zone. The figure turned. It turned 90 degrees to its left, matching him, and it started walking south, too, parallel to him, half a mile to his north, moving through the burn on a line that stayed exactly parallel to his own line, at exactly his own speed. Kell stopped. The figure stopped. Kell said no. He turned north. He started walking north. The figure turned north. It walked toward him, straight at him, half a mile ahead, at the same walking pace. Kell stopped. The figure stopped. Kell was breathing a little harder now. His heart rate was up. Not from exertion. He knew the difference. He had come to know the difference between his heart rate from exertion and his heart rate from adrenaline over 16 seasons on the burn. This was adrenaline. He stood on the ridge, and he thought. The figure was ahead of him, half a mile, standing still on the burn, facing him now, not moving. Kell thought. The figure was not another firefighter. The figure was not a hunter. The figure was not a native from one of the villages who had walked out into the burn for some reason. The figure had walked backwards on the burn. The figure had walked on all four limbs. The figure had matched him in every direction he had gone. The figure was not something Kell had a category for. He was, he understood, going to have to make a decision. He could keep trying to close the distance. He had tried that for 2 hours. It had not worked. He could stop and wait for the crew to notice he was missing at the 1700 check-in and to come find him. He had told Rannick he would be back at the drop zone by 1700. If he was not back, they would come get him. That was the plan. They would come north, along the ridge, and find him, and get him back. Except that his radio was not working. And his sat phone was not working. And he had walked about 4 miles west of where he had told them he would be. And by 1700, he was going to have been on the ridge for nearly 10 hours. And Rannick would come looking, probably, but he would come looking north, along the ridge in the direction Kell had said he was going, not 4 miles further west than the perimeter should have taken him. Rannick was going to look. But Rannick was going to look at the wrong place. Kell was going to have to get himself back. He looked at the figure. He said, "All right." He turned south. He started walking south, back toward the drop zone. The figure walked south, too, half a mile ahead on a parallel line, matching him. Kell walked. He walked for 2 hours. He watched the figure the whole time. The figure never fell behind. It never got closer. It walked on a parallel line half a mile to the west of him at exactly his pace. When he slowed, it slowed. When he sped up, it sped up. When he stopped to drink, it stopped and stood. At about 1400, the sun was high and hot for interior Alaska in September. Kel had drunk about 1.5 liters of his 3 liters of water. His shirt was soaked through under the pack straps. His feet, in the boots he had been standing and walking in for 6 hours, were starting to be a factor. Not blistered. He had trained his feet against blisters over 16 seasons, but there was heat in them. He was, when he checked the sun for direction, walking south-southeast. That was not south. That was not the direction he had been walking 2 hours ago. 2 hours ago, he had been walking south. Now the sun said south-southeast. He stopped. He looked at the figure. The figure had been on a parallel line to him. If he had been walking south, then the figure had been walking south. If he was now walking south-southeast, then the figure was on a line further east than it had started. But it was still 1/2 mile from him, which meant that his own line had been drifting east, and the figure's line had been drifting east too, and the figure had been keeping the exact distance the whole time. And south-southeast from where he was standing was not the direction of the drop zone. South-southeast was into the deeper interior. Kel said, "No." He turned. He walked west. He walked at a fast walk toward the setting sun. The sun was not setting yet. It was 2 in the afternoon, but he lined himself up with west and walked. The figure turned. It walked with him, 1/2 mile ahead, on a line still exactly to his north. Kel walked west for 20 minutes. Then he stopped and checked his compass. The compass said he was walking north-northwest. He was not walking west. He had been walking north-northwest for 20 minutes without knowing it. The figure was. He understood. In the specific, quiet way a man understands a thing he has been coming to understand for hours, hurting him. He had, without meaning to, walked 8 miles north of the drop zone. He was, on the ordinary reckoning of his location on the ridge on the 3rd of September, 2026, at about 2:20 in the afternoon, some 10 miles from the drop zone. In country his crew was not going to search until they had first searched the country he had told them he would be in, which was 2 miles west of the drop zone along the perimeter. Kel sat down on the burn. He sat with his pack on his back and his hands on his knees, and he looked at the ground. The figure sat down too, 1/2 mile ahead. It sat facing him. It was too far away for Kel to see its face. He could see the shape of it, the yellow Nomex, the hard hat, the pack, sitting in the specific way a firefighter sits on the burn, knees up, hands on the knees, chin down. Kel said, out loud, "What do you want?" The figure did not answer. Kel sat on the burn and thought. He was, he told himself, going to have to accept the fact that whatever the figure was, it was not going to let him walk south. Every time he turned south, it turned him north. He thought about running. He was Kel Bristow, 41, one of the best smoke jumpers in the Alaska region. He had run 6 marathons. He had done the Iron Line Fire Endurance Challenge in 2022 in the top 10%. He could run for hours on uneven ground with a pack. If he ran, he thought, he could break the distance. He could get south. He could get to a point where the radio would pick up the base, where the sat phone would find a satellite. He could get out. He thought about waiting for dark. But dark was 6 hours away, and the figure had matched him at every speed and every direction for 6 hours already. He had no reason to think it would not match him in the dark. He looked at the figure. The figure was sitting on the burn, watching him. Kel said, "All right, we will do this in the morning." He stood up. He walked 20 yards to a stump of a spruce that had burned to about waist height. He set his pack against it. He unclipped his fusee case. He unshouldered his hydration bladder and checked it. He had about 1.5 liters of water left. He had food for 2 more days, if he was careful. He had a fire shelter. He had a small, lightweight ground bivvy in his pack that he had brought as a precaution. He set up a small camp. In the specific, efficient way he had learned to set up a camp on a burn. He built a small fire in a scrape. He used the fusee. He fed the fire with pieces of burned spruce he broke off from a fallen snag nearby. The fire went. He set his bivvy about 6 feet from the fire. He drank about 1/3 of a liter of water. He ate a piece of jerky and a granola bar. He sat with his back against the stump and he watched the figure. The figure was still sitting on the burn 1/2 mile from him, not moving. Kel watched. The sun went down at about 8:40. In the low light, the figure got harder to see. Its yellow Nomex went dark. Its shape became less specific against the burn. At about 9:30, in the last of the light, the figure did the third strange thing. It stood up. Kel had been watching it. He saw it stand. Then it started to do calisthenics. That was what it looked like. Warm-up movements. It bent forward and touched its palms to the ground and stood up and rolled its shoulders. It rotated its head. Kel watched through a full 360-degree rotation, its head going all the way around while its shoulders stayed square to him, and then again in the other direction. It bent one leg up to its chest. It bent the other leg up. It rolled its arms in big circles. It was warming up. It was a runner warming up before a race. Kel watched. He said out loud, in the small, quiet way of a man alone on a burn in the interior of Alaska at 9:30 in the evening of the 3rd of September, 2026, watching a figure 1/2 mile away do warm-up exercises on the burn, no. The figure did not stop. It went on for about 11 minutes. Then it stood still. It faced Kel. It waited. Kel built up his fire. He did not sleep. He sat with his back against the stump, and he watched the figure through the night. The figure stood on the burn and did not move for 6 hours. At about 3 in the morning, it did another set of stretches. Then it stood still again. It watched him. Kel watched back. At about 5:30 in the morning, the eastern sky began to gray. Kel could see the figure more clearly. Yellow Nomex. Hard hat. Pack standing on the burn. He got up. His legs were stiff from sitting through the night. His shoulders were sore from the pack straps. His feet were tender. He drank about 1/3 of a liter of water. He ate a granola bar. He shouldered his pack. He looked at the figure. He said, out loud, "All right, let's do this." He turned south. He started to run. He ran on the burn. He ran in the way he ran on a training day, with the pack riding tight against his back and his stride measured for endurance. He was Kel Bristow, 41. One of the best smoke jumpers in the Alaska region. He was in the best condition of his life. He knew how to run on uneven ground. He knew how to read the country. He was going to run south for as long as it took to get south, and he was going to make the figure work to keep up. The figure ran. It ran south with him, 1/2 mile ahead, on a parallel line. at exactly his pace. Kel ran for 20 minutes at his training pace. He was breathing at a rate that was, for him, moderate. He was not winded. He was in a working rhythm. The pack was manageable. His feet were fine. He was doing what he was made to do. The figure was on the same rhythm. He sped up. He went from a training pace to a 5-minute mile pace. This was, for him, a race pace. He could hold it for about an hour. He could hold it for about 70 minutes if he had to. The figure sped up. It stayed exactly half a mile ahead. Kel ran at race pace for 30 minutes. His breathing was getting deeper. His heart rate was up around 170. His shoulders were burning under the pack. His quads were beginning to feel the pace. He understood, going to be able to hold this for another 30 minutes, maybe 40. Then he was going to have to slow. He looked ahead at the figure. The figure was running with him at exactly the same speed. Kel said, in his head, "All right." He kicked to a full sprint. He went at a 4-minute mile pace. This was the pace he could hold for about 200 meters. He kicked at it because he thought, in the specific way of a runner who had decided he was going to break the pursuit, that if he could open the gap for a few seconds, if he could get past what the figure could match, then something would change. He ran at the sprint for 11 seconds. The figure ran at the sprint too, exactly half a mile ahead. Kel held the sprint for another 8 seconds. His lungs were burning. His legs were burning. He had never held a sprint like this on a burn with a pack. The figure held it, exactly half a mile ahead, feet turning over at the same rate as Kel's. Kel slowed to a run. The figure slowed to a run. Kel ran for another 20 minutes at a moderate pace. He understood, breathing at a rate that was not sustainable. He was sweating harder than he should have been in the cool of a September morning in the interior. His mouth was dry. He was going through his water at a rate that meant he had about an hour of running left before he was out. He kept running. At about 8 in the morning, he crossed a small drainage. There was a little water in the bottom of it, standing between rocks. He stopped. He filled his hydration bladder. He put in an iodine tablet. He drank about half a liter cold and cloudy from the bladder while it was still working on the iodine. The figure stopped at the same time. It stood on the burn half a mile ahead. Kel drank until his stomach was tight with the water. Then he shouldered the pack and started running again. The figure ran. At about 10 in the morning, Kel's left calf seized. He felt it start, the small warning of a muscle that was about to cramp, and he tried to compensate with his stride. It cramped anyway. It cramped hard, up the whole calf, and Kel went down. He hit the burn on his hands and knees. He rolled to his side and pulled his knee to his chest and tried to stretch the calf out. He was breathing hard. Sweat was running off his face into the black ash of the burn. He understood, breaking down. He looked ahead. The figure had stopped when he had gone down. It was standing on the burn, watching him. Kel got to his feet. He tested the calf. It was going to hold his weight if he was careful. He started walking. He walked south at about 3 miles an hour. The figure walked. Kel walked for 2 hours. He walked through the noon of the 4th of September in the specific hard sun of interior Alaska in September, and his water was almost gone, and his shoulders were raw, where the pack straps had chafed through his nomex and into his skin. and his calf was tightening on him every few minutes, and he was having to stop to stretch it out. And his tongue was thick, and his vision was starting to shimmer at the edges, the way it shimmered in the specific state that came before the state you did not want to come into on the burn. At about 2 in the afternoon, he stopped. He stopped because he could not go on. He dropped his pack. He sat on a burned log. He put his head down on his knees. His breathing was ragged. His heart was racing. His legs were shaking. He was Kel Bristow, 41, one of the best smoke jumpers in the Alaska region, and he had run and walked for 8 hours through the interior with a full pack, and he was done. He was going to sit on this log until either his crew came for him or the figure came for him. He drank the last of his water. It was warm. It tasted like iodine. He looked at the figure. The figure was closer. It had, at some point during the last half hour, closed the distance. Not by much. It was maybe a quarter mile now. It had stopped when he had stopped. It was standing on the burn, watching him. Kel watched. The figure walked toward him, slowly, at a walking pace. The specific pace of a person who has all the time in the world. Kel watched it come. It came to a quarter mile. It came to 1/8 of a mile. It came to 100 yards. It came to 50 yards. It stopped. Kel could see it now. Really see it. Yellow Nomex, same as his. Faded a little at the shoulders, the way his was faded. Hard hat. The same brand of hard hat, with a specific McGrath base sticker on the left side. Pack, the same pack Kel was wearing. The same brand. The same model, the same wear on the straps that Kel's pack had. Boots. The same boots, the Rizal line at the same place, on the leather. And it had a face. The face was Kel's face. Not his face now. Kel's face at maybe 55. Weathered, thinner, the same jawline. The same eyes. The same small scar over the left eyebrow that Kel had gotten in 2003 when he had fallen off a scaffold at his cousin's job site in Anchorage. The same crow's feet Kel had at 41, deeper. The same specific line at the corner of the mouth. Kel Bristow at 55, standing 50 yards away in the burn, watching him. Kel said out loud, in the specific hoarse way of a man who had run for 8 hours and was out of water, The older Kel said, me. His voice was Kel's voice. Older, a little rougher. Kel said what? The older Kel said, you have to keep up. That is the whole of it. You have to keep up until you cannot. And when you cannot, you sit down. And then the next one is yours. Kel said what the older Kel said. 16 years ago, I sat down on a burn on Iron Creek. The one before me had led me there for 2 days. I sat down. He went. And I took over. And I have been the one before, for 16 years. Kel said, you are me. The older Kel said, you will be me. In 16 years. On a mop-up outside McGrath. A younger man will be leading you here. You will not be able to help it. When you cannot run anymore, you will sit down. He will take over. And you will go. Kel said, go where? The older Kel said, I do not know. I did not go. I went the other direction. I was the one before. Now I am done. He looked at Kel. He said, you held out longer than most. Kel said, how long? The older Kel said, 28 hours. My man held out 16. The one before him, 10. You are the best I have had. He said, I chose well. Kel tried to stand up. His legs would not hold him. He got about 8 inches off the log, and he had to sit back down. The older Kel walked the last 50 yards. He came to stand in front of Kel. He stopped about 3 feet away. Kel looked up at him. The older Kel put his hand on Kel's shoulder. Kel felt it, the weight. The specific hand shape of a hand that was his hand at 55. The pressure. The warmth of it through the Nomex. The older Kel said, "You did well, Kel. You did the work." He said, "Rest here." He took his hand off Kel's shoulder. He took off his pack. He set it on the burn beside Kel. He took off his hard hat. He set it on the pack. He unzipped his Nomex shirt and took it off. He set it on top of the hard hat. He sat down and pulled off his boots. He set them beside the pack. He was wearing a gray T-shirt and underwear. He stood up. He looked at Kel. He said, "That is all yours now." Kel said, "What?" The older Kel said, "The kit. It is yours. You will need it for 16 years. Kel said, "No." The older Kel said, "Yes." He turned. He walked north. He walked past Kel into the burn, and he did not stop, and he did not turn around. He walked at a steady pace, north through the burn scar, in a gray T-shirt and underwear and bare feet, in the specific cold of interior Alaska in September. And he did not appear to feel any of it. He walked in a straight line north. Kel watched him go. He got smaller. He got small enough to be a shape on the burn. He got small enough to be a mark on the burn. He got small enough that Kel could not tell whether he was still walking or standing still. Then he was gone. Kel sat on the log. His breathing had slowed. His heart rate had come down. His hands were on his knees. He looked at the pack and the hard hat and the Nomex shirt and the boots on the burn beside him. His own pack was on the burn where he had dropped it, 5 feet away. He said, out loud, in the specific voice of a man who was trying to understand something he did not want to understand, "No." He tried to stand. His legs would not hold him. He sat back down on the log. He sat there for a long time. The sun went across the sky. At about 6 in the afternoon, it started to go down. Kel watched it go. He was on a burned log on a burn on the north side of a ridge in the interior of Alaska, and he was 10 miles from where his crew was going to search for him, and he was out of water, and his legs would not carry him. He was. He understood, in the specific way of a man understanding a thing that has come to be true whether he wants it to be or not, going to die on this burn. His crew was going to search the drop zone perimeter for 2 days. They were going to find no sign of him. On the 3rd day, they were going to bring in a helicopter from Fairbanks, and they were going to search the country to the west of the drop zone. On the 4th day, they were going to expand the search north. But by the 4th day, it was going to have been 84 hours since he had gone missing, and he was going to have been dead for 2 of those days, and his body was going to be 40 miles further north than they had thought to look, and they were not going to find him. He was going to be posted missing. His parents in Kenai were going to be told. His sister in Seattle was going to be told. His ex-wife in Anchorage, they had not spoken in 11 years, but she was still on the emergency contact list, was going to be told. He was going to be on the record of the McGrath BLM base for the season of 2026, a fatality. He looked at the pack the older Kel had left. He said, out loud, no. He tried to stand up again. He got about 6 inches off the log. He sat back down. He looked at the burn to the north, where the older Kell had walked. There was nothing there now, just the black burn going up the ridge to the horizon. He sat on the log and watched the sun go down. It went below the horizon at about 8:30. The light stayed in the sky for another 40 minutes. Then it went. The temperature dropped fast, the way it dropped in the interior in September when the sun went. It was maybe 40 degrees. It was going to get to about 20 by 3 in the morning. He was in a Nomex shirt and pants that were sweat-soaked. He was not going to make it through the night. He knew that. He sat on the log and thought about it. He thought about his sister. He had not seen her since 2023. He thought about his mother. He thought about the small cabin he had built outside McGrath in 2016, where he had spent his winters. He thought about the 4 dogs he had adopted from the shelter in Fairbanks over the years, 3 of which had died, and 1 of which, a red husky named Bram, was. That afternoon of the 4th of September, at his neighbor's place in McGrath, waiting for him to come home from the mop-up, he thought about Bram. He said, out loud, "I'm sorry." His voice was rough. His mouth was dry. He sat on the log in the dark and waited to die. He did not die dramatically. He did not die screaming. He sat on the burned log, on the burned scar, on the north side of the ridge in the interior of Alaska, on the 4th of September, 2026. And at some point in the small hours of the 5th, his heart, which had been racing all afternoon and had been slowing through the evening, stopped. He was dehydrated. His core temperature had fallen. He was still upright when he went. His body slumped forward, and his head came down on his chest. The burn was quiet. The stars were out. At some distance north of the log, where the older Kell had walked into the burn and had gotten small and had disappeared, nothing moved. There was nobody in the burn. The older Kell was not there. He had been the pacer for 16 years, and he had. When he had left the kit on the burn beside Kell, gone, wherever it was that the pacer went when he was done. Kell was the pacer now. Not yet. He would be. In the interval between his death and the moment when the next runner came, he was going to be with the burn. His body was going to be in the burn. Nobody was going to find it. And he was going to be there for 16 years, waiting. The kit sat on the burn beside him. 16 years passed. Fires burned across the Alaskan interior. Some big, some small. The one that started on the north bank of the Nowitna in the fall of 2028 burned across the ridge where Kell had died and turned the burn scar into a bigger burn scar and covered his bones with a new layer of ash. In 2031, a section of tundra south of the ridge slumped from permafrost thaw. In 2035, a caribou herd of about 600 passed through the ridge on their fall migration. In 2039, a bush pilot flying a supply run to a village on the Kuskokwim reported seeing, off his left wing at about 2,200 feet, a figure walking on the burn scar. He had been the only person to see it in 12 years. He did not report it to anyone. He assumed it was a hunter. In August of 2042, a spot fire started near Iron Creek, about 90 miles east of where Kell had died. It was contained in 3 days. It was a mop-up job. 2, maybe 3 days of walking the perimeter. Cakework. On the 4th of September 2042, At 7:40 in the morning, a six-person crew jumped from a twin otter at 2,200 feet above the burn scar on the north bank of Iron Creek. The jump boss was a man named Cormac Ennis, 6'1", 185, 43 years old, in the physical condition of a man who had spent his entire adult life at the top level of a job that required him to be. 12 seasons out of McGrath. Divorced. No kids. Lived alone in a small cabin outside McGrath in the off-season. One of the best jump bosses in the region. Knew it. He hit the ground at the north end of the drop zone in a controlled roll. He gathered his chute. He stripped his jumpsuit. He shouldered his pack. He picked up his Pulaski. He walked over to his second, a woman named Traeger. He said, "I'll take the north perimeter." Traeger said, "That's the long side." He said, "I know." Traeger looked at him. She said, "That's the long side alone, Cormac." He said, "I'll be back at the drop zone by 1700. If I'm not, come get me." She said, "You want to take Rickard. He's here to learn." Cormac said, "Not on the long side. He'll slow me." Traeger said, "All right." Cormac shouldered his pack. He tested his sat phone. He set his radio to channel 1. He took a swallow from his hydration bladder. He pulled his gloves on. He walked north. 2 hours in, he crested the low ridge on the north edge of the burn scar. He stopped at the top and drank from the bladder. He looked north. He saw the figure. It was ahead of him on the ridge, half a mile, walking west at the same pace he had been walking. Yellow Nomex, hard hat, pack, same kit he was wearing, same speed. Cormac Ennis stopped. He unclipped his radio. He said on channel 1, "Cormac to Traeger. I've got a visual on somebody north of me on the ridge, about half a mile ahead, in Nomex. You copy." "Static," he said. Traeger, "come back." Static, he tried channel 2. He tried the sat phone. Then he sped up, from a fast walk to a jog. The figure ahead sped up. The distance between them stayed exactly half a mile. Cormac Ennis, 43 years old, one of the best jump bosses in the Alaska region, in the best condition of his life, kept running west along the ridge on the north bank of Iron Creek on the 4th of September, 2042. The figure ahead of him ran too. The distance stayed the same. It was going to stay the same for the rest of the day, and for the night, and for the day after, and it was going to stay the same until Cormac Ennis, running through the interior with a full pack in the specific hard sun of Alaska in September, could not run anymore, and sat down on a burned log, and looked up, and saw his own face, at 59, walking toward him across the burn. But Cormac Ennis did not know that yet. He was running west on the ridge. He was Cormac Ennis, jump boss out of McGrath. He was the best in the region. He was going to catch that figure. The figure kept running. Ahead of him. Half a mile. Exactly